Dr. Christine Schaffner, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to connect with you.
Absolutely. Well, you have a unique perspective, in my opinion, in this space because you're a naturopathic doctor. You kind of work from an integrative health perspective, and yet there's this sort of new landscape called bioregulatory medicine, which is where you, I think at this point have landed, although I see you evolving constantly. So who knows where you're going to be in 10 years, but this is a very fascinating space. So maybe you can just kind of give me just lay the lay of the land when it comes to bioregulatory medicine. How does that work, and what's your framework?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trained as a naturopathic doctor. It's been a little over 15 years now, which is hard to believe. And I had some really great mentors that taught me bioregulatory medicine. And this is the medicine that came out of Austria and Switzerland and Germany. And it has some really key principles that help me with whatever shows up in my office on any given day. It's getting more complex and more interesting and challenging me to evolve my model. And we can talk a lot more about that. But the principles, stand the test of time. And they really, I think, are the forefront of terrain theory and terrain medicine. So especially, here we are 2025 recording this, and we all got a lesson in germ theory during COVID, right? So we have a virus, we have a set of symptoms, and that's where that stops, germ theory, right? It has a certain treatment, and there you go. And terrain theory is like, okay, how can we treat you personally and individually, and really look at your health story and health history that I believe starts before we even got here, right? From either preconception work to ancestral and even soul medicine, and how that influences us on our journey of where we are in present time. And that story gives us a lot of clues of where we have stressors, or we have unresolved trauma, or we have hidden issues that we're not conscious of yet. And it's bringing all of that into light and creating a more resilient system, not only on a physical level, but on an emotional, I would say electromagnetic, plasma, light, sound, all of that, that makes who we are. And so when COVID came around, I had a very different framework for a virus entering my patients.
Right.
It was like, how do I strengthen them and give them tools so that they're not fearful and they feel empowered? So that's really kind of a summary of terrain theory. And then there's another key element to bioregulatory medicine that is this concept of interference fields. And I expand upon this idea more and more as I reflect on how to help people. But it is coming from this principle that, we trust the body, right? The body is intelligent, it's wise, I would say divine, and that it knows how to heal better than any doctor. I'm still learning very much about the body, and the body knows, right? The body knows how to heal a wound or create homeostasis. And we have these two systems that I think are really important when we think about our healing capacity. And that's the autonomic nervous system. Many people have heard about, but it takes care of all of the automatic functions in the body. Most importantly, the vagus nerve. A lot of people know that that's a window into the autonomic nervous system. And then I would also say the fascia is another really important highway of communication and regulation.
Maybe you can expand about the fascia. Like, what is that? How do people understand that?
Yeah, there's, a really exciting conversation out there now going on about the fascia. And, when we do Gross Lab and we learn about the human body through dead tissue, we think about the fascia as just structural. I remember, cutting through it and, learning how the body worked through how that the fascia wrapped around organs and held us in place. And then there's a really exciting conversation looking at living fascia. That's the work of Dr. Jean-Claude Gumberteau, and he looked at living fascia in his hand surgeries. And that book really brought it to life for me, how this is a delivery system in the body. It delivers the plasma form of water and keeps us hydrated and keeps water moving in our system. And then our pioneer, Maywan Ho, who's a biophysicist, she looked at the fascia as really a modern language for the acupuncture system. And she looked at that because the fascia is a conductor in the body. It's a semiconductor, and it can conduct light and electrons and sound even, and unblocking restrictions or adhesions in that acupuncture matrix allowed information to flow, and that would allow the body to communicate better and operate as a whole system. And so I think of, I've done a talk, I called it the fascia is the fabric of quantum communication. And I see that lens, and I very much see the physical layer of the fascia. And with this idea of interference fields, we think about what's interrupting and interfering that self-healing capacity. So in bioregulatory medicine, we're trained that there are infections that are hidden in the body and can affect those systems. And then we're taught about scars, so scar interference fields. So with the fascial conversation, I had treated scars for a long time before I opened Gumberto's book, and then I opened his picture of scar tissue in living systems under the microscope, and it like all made sense because the original fascial fabric is very mobile and fractal, and it's delicate but sturdy, and it moves, it moves water, it moves light throughout the system. And when we get injured, we have a repair mechanism that plugs the hole, right, which thank goodness we have. But it's kind of like this scrappy, like denser, more regular plug in the middle of this fabric. And so I like to say it creates a traffic jam in the fascia. And so scar tissue is that traffic jam that is separate from the rest of the body. And it can also, because of its netting structure, it can accumulate toxicants and even microbes and pathogens and trauma. We can talk about that too. And so we do neural therapy in bioregulatory medicine, and we have techniques to inject the scar and bring, energy and attention to the scar. But we break down the fascial fabric and try to restore circulation and communication in that tissue. And often people will have an emotional release because that's often stored in that network in the water. And what we think it's the fascial memory is why the memories there. So we have scars, and then we have hidden infections. So these are infections that have gone silent, that we don't have the normal response of inflammation, of getting the immune system to clear an infection. So it's not going to be hot and red and painful and inflamed. It's going to be hidden, and cryptic, and it's a reservoir of microbes that the body doesn't either see or no longer has the energy to clear. And that can be in the sinuses and the tonsils. It can also be in other tissues, but those are the common ones, and also the mouth. And so we have a whole way we assess that and treat that. But we're just really trying to take the energy leaks out of the system so the body can relax and do what it knows how to do better than any of my protocols. And so, it's a really rewarding system. And I always, no matter what comes into my office, really go through my checklist. And it's amazing how we feel so passionate about this, because I think there's just so much more education that's needed about bioregulatory medicine and the foundation of where medicine is going. But people come in, our office and haven't heard of many of these things still. So we still have a lot of work to do out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is what's important, is that you're actually mentioning systems that don't seem to be on the surface related to something like food sensitivities and gut issues, right?
Yeah.
But when you take this bioregulatory approach, you're actually looking at the entire system as a connected system. And you mentioned germ theory and terrain theory, and I've over the years heard lots of debates and discussions around these things, and I think there can be these views of them being sort of opposed, and to me it's like, well, no, it's an and situation, right? Where it's like this sort of germ theory, which is that these microbes and these pathogens are the problem. So let's kill them, right? And then there's the sort of terrain purist, you could say, that maybe don't have this integrated approach where they say, well, no, it's the terrain and these things are fine. They don't cause problems. Yeah. But it's like there can be a both and one of the analogies that I like to think of when it comes to bioregulatory medicine and sort of the terrain and sort of the germ theory kind of thing is, imagine if I if I took an orange tree and I
Mhm.
planted it in Alaska
Mhm.
in February,
Mhm.
right? The soil's perfect, right? Like everything can be perfect, but I planted it in the wrong location and at the
Yes.
wrong time of year, right? So
Yes.
it's like the environment matters, the timing matters.
Mhm.
But then I could take that same orange tree and plant it in Florida
Mhm.
at the correct time of year. But if the soil's wrong, right? If
Mhm.
the lighting is wrong, there's tons of shade, for example, whatever the
Mhm.
case might be. So it's like we really got to look at all of these systems, right? Is the
Yes.
soil condition correct? Is the temperature and the lighting conditions correct? Is it the proper time of year? Is it getting enough water?
Mhm.
Right. And it's just much more easy to see when we sort of use that analogy, because I think we don't assume that the orange tree is faulty genetically.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with the orange tree or the
Yes.
seed or whatever the
Mhm.
case is. It's like we have to look at all the environmental factors, the timing and those type of things. And so when it comes to the human, that's really what we need to consider, including timing, right? The timing of things. So and now I want to transition to food sensitivities in
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah.
You know, when I kind of started in this sort of functional medicine, integrative health world, this was maybe close to 15, 20 years ago, something like that. My perception, and I think there's a big perception out there in the field as a whole, was that we have these foods and they're really inflammatory to the system, right? We can kind of name these things: gluten, wheat, dairy, eggs, soy, corn. What else? I'm missing probably a couple, but those are like the big ones,
Nightshades.
right? Nightshades, right? And so when people are sensitive to these things, we just remove them.
Mhm.
And then we heal the gut, right? Because we know that the gut is playing a role. And if we do that, then everything's good. But there is still this perception that these foods are bad, right? And they're not really designed, so to speak, or we're not really designed to eat them. And I think since then, there's been a lot of understanding that has come from that. I'm curious about your sort of evolution of your education on this, coming from the naturopathic world, where you started and now kind of where you're at on the bioregulatory side. How did that shift for you, and what have you seen in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, an evolving field for sure. I would say that, when I went to naturopathic school, food allergies were still very much, food allergies and intolerances were still very much trying to get their scientific footing, to get adoption, even in integrative medical clinics and
They
functional
didn't even
medicine.
recognize them for a while. Like this
Yeah,
idea
it
of,
was
of
like,
gluten. We
yeah.
had what's it called when you're allergic to gluten, right? And
Yes.
you were
Celiac.
celiac,
Yeah.
right? We knew that, but then there was like this gluten sensitivity thing, and there was
Yeah.
like this debate: is it real, or is it
Yeah.
just these health people talking about this weird
Totally.
stuff?
And that's like lumped into leaky gut, right?
Totally,
Too. So
totally.
it was interesting to see, that knowledge be validated and adopted, which I think is wonderful.
Yep.
And I think, I'm not going to sit here and say that, it like not, basically eliminating your food allergies is not going to provide a great effect in the body. Of course it is. A lot of people feel better. I think it's a complex issue, right? And I think that we talk about food, there are these constitutional epigenetic, factors, right? Celiac or lactose intolerance, or, a corn allergy or soy allergy, like legitimate IgE allergy,
In
right?
other words, the genetic constitution of somebody
Yes.
is playing a role in the manifestation of these things.
Yes.
No matter how healthy you are,
Yeah.
there's still that component.
Yeah.
Right?
So there is, that piece.
Like that's real.
Yeah. And then I think that we cannot talk about food without talking about herbicides and really the mass, adoption of herbicides and organophosphates in our food system.
Right.
And also the soil depletion, right? So I think the food that we're eating here in 2025 is not the food our grandparents ate,
Yep.
right? Same food categories, they're very different. And we could talk, and I'm sure people are already talking about, wheat is not the wheat that
right.
we think it is, right? Wheat is sprayed heavily with glyphosate before it comes to the market,
Right before, right?
Yes.
Even if it's quote unquote organic, they can still desiccate it right
Exactly.
before,
Yeah.
so that it actually goes to seed
Yeah.
and they get more harvest.
Mhm.
And that's still a practice used today.
So I think, and I have a lot more to say than the quality piece, but I want to just preface my conversation that we cannot think about food without taking this, toxicity in the food, this depletion in the food, and, really that in the genetically modified, part of, food on the market. And we're in a grand experiment, right? There's wonderful people who are turning to regenerative ag, and I really think that's going to be the way forward. But right now, we're not there yet, and we just are in education. So I think about, okay, we have constitution, We have toxicity in our food supply, and we're responding to that. And then I think about the immune system and how really food allergies, what they really, what we're really saying there. And then how can we make people resilient, and are these food allergies more transient than like really stable constitutionally? And I've seen that.
Expand on that.
Yeah. So I'll maybe share a story
Yeah.
that really taught me in my career. I had a naturopathic doctor come see me and see our clinic, and she lived on a farm, and she was struggling with MS, and she was able to, test herself often because she had access to a lot of labs being a naturopathic doctor. And she knew she had anaphylactic allergies to dairy and wheat and a few others.
And
there
this
were
would be an IgE response.
like if you take a food allergy test, like a US Biotech or whatever other ones are on the market, even LabCorp, it was IgE positive. I saw that with my own eyes. And then, we were doing terrain cleanup work, and one of the factors, which is, very common in our society, we just don't give it credence enough. It's getting better. We're talking about it more and more, but parasitic exposures and parasites in our bodies and how they can shift our immune system. And so we put her on a parasite cleanse that took a couple months, and she was noticing that she was less sensitive in general. And then she decided to test herself, and her IgE on 2 of the markers completely shifted. And I didn't know that was possible. That was a moment where I was like, that really taught me that, okay, so if allergy can be modulated and shifted, that opened my mind up a lot. And then here we are, with so many people being so allergic and sensitive now, that story really imprinted me. So I think for the average person showing up in a functional medicine practice, I think that these food allergies can be helpful to abstain from, to not put fuel on the fire. But the real issue is in the immune system, the microbiome, and this concept of allergy that we can, talk a lot about. So I've seen a lot of people tolerate more foods after doing this work than when they started. And that's really the goal. I think that we can create a lot of mental, emotional distress. Food is something that we have to interact with every day. A lot of women and men have struggled with some disordered eating in their life. And, when we hyper focus on food, it can create a lot of stress. And there's a time for us to be more restrictive when we're healing. But the goal is, I want people like the 80-20 rule, right? Can they, eat well at home and know the foods that they do best on, but they can go to their loved one's wedding or go to, Thanksgiving and participate, in that event without being, really isolated from their families because of, their food choices and everything. So that's really my goal for people. And I've seen it enough that we can shift, food sensitivities and food intolerances.
Well, I think this is important because, I see it a lot where we have this PTSD almost around foods, and rightfully so, right? I mean, again, I like analogies, and I think there's a difference between being so hyper aware and hyper vigilant around food, where we have this mindset that things can't change. I'm always going to be sensitive. I always react. This is my genetic profile, it's my constitution, and it's a threat. It's a danger. And I think it's akin to, when I cross the road, right? I'm aware. I'm looking for cars, right? But I'm also not fearful of crossing the road, right? I'm not walking across the road deathly afraid that I'm going to get hit by a car, even though that's a possibility. But there's an awareness that I have around cars, not a fear and not this danger threat mode. And to me, that's really where I think we can hopefully get to around food, even if you're one who is sensitive to 30, 40 foods, entire food groups.
Yep.
Because there's a PTSD that locks into the mental framework, and even at the nervous system level where this hypervigilance kicks in. And if we adopt this mentality that food is a threat, either consciously or subconsciously, then that nervous system reaction is going to be so strong that even with some of the cleanup and all these things, I may never recover because I have
Yeah.
this belief and this neurological path sort of grooved in so deeply that there's these threats. And so I think your message is really, really important for us to continue to share, which is that I'm open to anything changing, you know, like you can do all the tests in the world. And I still believe there's so much magic that can happen on the healing level that, and I want people to have that, to hold that view that even if they don't fully believe yet, that they hold out hope that something can shift. Because if you don't, then there's so much greater of a chance that you're really locking that future in for yourself that you can't recover, that you'll always be sensitive, that these foods are threats. And that's just not a way that I think most people want to walk through the world.
Yeah. It becomes like a little prison.
Totally.
Know?
You've created for yourself.
Yeah.
And again, sort of rightfully so. Like I understand why we create these prisons. Like it makes sense to me, but nevertheless, I think it's important to recognize that we're actually putting up the walls and repairing the walls and continuing to build them.
Yeah. And I know you did, all these docuseries and documentaries on longevity. And we just have to like put in this conversation too, that eating together and in community is one of the best things you could probably do for your health. And I went to Joel Salatin's farm and I spoke there, and one of the MPHs at the event, he said he poured through all the mortality data, access to healthcare, not access to healthcare, and he stood there firmly and said the number one factor in all health, but before diets and toxins and infections, all the things I do, right, is community, and living
Social
in community.
Connection. Yeah. So if somebody comes to you and, they're presenting with a lot of different symptoms, and let's say a core aspect of those symptoms would be, I can't eat this food, that food, and they have the whole list of foods, or maybe they come in with a list of foods that they can eat.
Yes.
And I've seen this with a lot of hypersensitive people when it comes to, immune responses, whether it's, MCAS or whether it's, some sort of hyperimmune response. They're down to a handful of foods.
Yeah.
What's your approach, analyzing and kind of figuring out what's going on there, and how to approach that?
I try not to overfixate on the food when they come in, because they're so fixated on the food and they're so limited. So I'm trying to create more resilience. And many of, I look at it through the mast cell, and we've talked about this before, so we can just dive in there. I look at it from infections driving immune behaviors that end up looking like allergy through mast cell. And mast cells live in all of these places in the body, in our mucous membranes, in our brain, around our vagus nerve, in the gut lining, in our connective tissue, around our lymphatics, around our blood vessels, and they're there to sense, danger, right? And they're there to be an alarm cell. And when they sound the alarm, they throw out over 200 mediators that create leakiness in membranes. They create inflammation. They create histamine responses, and general, unwell feeling. And I think
so. It's like when they sense a threat, then they unleash the military.
Yes,
it's like, okay, we've got something going on here. Like, go at it.
Yeah, and they recruit other immune cells too. So the immune system, I'm still learning about it, because I feel like we're still learning about it.
I think we are still learning about it.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I remember my immunology class in pre-med, he was like, I'm going to teach you this, and next year it's going to be completely different. And
well, that's good.
Yeah, it was like very meaningful to me to hear that. So I'm really trying to understand the mast cell through my patients' stories, really. I'm not a researcher. I'm a clinician foremost. And, we talked on the, elevator coming up here that, I'm really biased on results, right? And then I'm totally interested.
Almost work backwards, right?
To see what happened.
I swear that's how half this stuff comes about in the health world. It's like something worked, and you figure, well, why did that work? How did that work? What happened? Why didn't it work here? And then you start to figure things out that way versus sort of bottom up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so this mast cell piece is huge right now if you're practicing out there. And I think, for foods, there's two probably key areas to think about, or maybe three. So we have mast cells all along the digestive tract. And we also have them around our vagus nerve, which is really an important part of our neurological communication, and then around the enteric nerves in our gut lining. Also,
and by the way, the vagus nerve innervates the entire gut and goes to the spleen and the kidneys and the liver.
Yeah,
just
there's
goes
many
all
branches.
throughout the viscera, right?
So we have kind of bidirectional from the body to the brain through the vagus nerve. And then we have the enteric nervous system that's through the lining of the intestines. It helps, that's a really big part of the gut-brain connection and also motility. And then we have, I would say, mast cells in the Peyer's patches and the mucosa and the lymphatics and the GI tract. And then I would say that there are other systems that we can throw in this conversation where mast cells drive inflammation in the gut. And that can be in the sinuses, can be in the tonsils in the mouth.
Those are two places that I see a lot of people that are struggling with gut issues. They've been doing their gut tests. They've been, following protocols. They're trying to heal. They may make some progress and then it comes back, and it's just this constant cycle. And I generally find that it's because somebody didn't check to see if there's infections, there's biofilms, there's things going on in the nasal passage, and or like you said, in the mouth, there's in the teeth, there's just stuff going on and nobody's really bothered to look. And that seems to be a core source, maybe not the only, but a key piece.
It's a big hidden area, so it's talking really to the people who are still struggling cleaning up their GI tract after many protocols and not getting results. The SIBO that doesn't ever go away, these are those folks. And so we can test the sinuses, but we always include sinus treatments really in all of our protocols. But definitely if somebody's struggling with gut infections and food allergies.
What do you do for the mouth?
The mouth, I work with a lot of great biological dentists all over the country. We do a cone beam, basically 3D scan of the mouth, which actually is more available since I've started practicing. We used to have the 2D images, and now we have the 3D images. And so we're looking for silver fillings or amalgams, which people still have, and mercury vapor we inhale, and that can affect the whole gut-associated lymphoid tissue and affect our food responses. And then we look at root canals, which can harbor infection and be a direct, not only through swallowing and our saliva, but it can be a direct, direct kind of poisoning to the vagus nerve through the lymphatic channels, through the circulatory channels. So we have a really skilled biological dentist, do an evaluation. First, we get metals out, then we get infections out. And then a common area that is important for people who have chronic gut issues is the wisdom teeth site, because that's the small intestine, circulation, and endocrine. And it's also so close to the vagus nerve.
So you got say that again, because I think some people may not be familiar with the fact that certain teeth are kind of connected.
Totally. Yeah. So every tooth sits on an acupuncture meridian. And there can be correlations. I won't say causation, but correlations with infection or toxins on that tooth with that meridian system. So if you've gotten your wisdom teeth out and they didn't take out the periodontal ligament, that could be a area that is a full of necrotic bone. That's a hole in the jaw that the body cannot stimulate a response on its own to heal. And that space in the jaw is related to, through the meridian system, circulation, small intestine, and endocrine. And those kind of all go hand in hand. So those are the chronic gut issue people I always look for, not only the basics, but hidden, wisdom tooth cavitations.
Well, and this was interesting, because I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that, in like the meridian system, the energetic channels, et cetera. But I think as I continue to pay attention to all these things, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, and I start to notice these things. And, again, I'm not an expert, but there's points on the ear that relate to the entire body. There's points on the tongue that relate to parts of the body. And I was talking to one of my mentors in Ayurveda, Dr. Vasant Lad, and I was playing basketball in I think I was 13, 14, and I got hit underneath the jaw and I bit my tongue basically like in half, on the side here, and a massive scar. And I said, well, could that be, creating some imbalances? And I think it was the small intestine, perhaps, whatever, based off of the location. And he's like, yeah, that's, and so my interpretation of this, and we have these on our feet, right?
Yes.
Reflexology. And so my interpretation of this is that the body is unbelievably sort of fractalized and interconnected, and there's energetic connection points. And so if we disrupt that energetic channel or that connection point, then it's just going to disturb the field, so to speak, of these things. And so it's like, we're not broken. It's not the end of the world, but there is a disturbance in the sort of energetic field connection point. And so I think, again, I just like to observe some of these
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
And when you start to observe, oh, this person's got this, and also they have that. Interesting,
Yeah.
right? And it sort of proves out some of these things, which I wouldn't otherwise know how to prove or disprove, right? Some of these sort of ideas. But when you start to notice them a lot, then it kind of lends some credence to it. So I've really bought into some of these things, not as a way of analysis, but just almost observational kind of study and recognizing that, okay, that makes sense. Like this is mapped out over here,
Yes.
and it's been like that for thousands of years. So
Yes.
it's probably something to it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I didn't seek out to like be
Yeah,
a
right.
specialist in biological
Right,
dentistry.
right.
You know, it just I know I just moved to Boise, Idaho, and I'm like, I need to find the biological dentist in town and the mold expert and EMF expert, and now I
Right.
can practice.
Right.
You know?
Well, and
So,
that's good. I
yeah.
love that list right there, and it's
Yeah.
good for people to
Yeah.
actually kind of hear that, because
Yeah.
biological dentistry is one of those ones that I think, and it's a tricky thing too, because I've seen some not so good biological dentists.
Yeah.
And then there's really fantastic ones. So it's not like if you find one, you're all set. You still need to sort of, I guess, interview or get a feel for that person. Does it feel good?
Yeah.
And as you know more, I guess you start to become a little bit better judge of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, those three fields, if you can find experts in those, really can go a long way.
Yes.
Okay, so you check the nasal passage, you check the mouth
Yes.
for things going on there. What else would you do for that person that's come in that's got some of these things going on?
I always ask the history of their tonsils, whether they have them or whether they've had chronic strep or Epstein-Barr or had mercury and then they've inhaled a lot of mercury vapor in their tonsils. I think that tonsils are another gut-brain tissue, and so that's at the top of the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So if there's chronic tonsil, like if somebody has tonsil stones, halitosis, chronic sore throats, or had chronic sore throats and there's no longer a reaction, I'm always giving like oil pulling or different sprays. It's kind of all right here. We want to treat while we're cleaning up the gut. And so that's a really important immune tissue that gets overlooked. And, if you've had food allergies too, that are really more on the constitutional level, and also, secondary, your tonsils can get really inflamed from, just an inflamed gut. So calming that tissue down can also create resilience in the gut as well.
What are some things that might have happened to somebody in the past, let's say 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case is, that can create some of these disturbances and ultimately food sensitivities, immune dysfunction at that level that come to mind? Because when you're doing a workup, you're kind of looking at the health history. I know you are.
Yeah.
Some doctors don't. But that's
a
an
lot of
important
questions.
Yeah, that's an important
Yeah.
piece, right? Because there's stuff that happens, and there's probably too many for you to name. But just kind of what comes to mind as some of those things that you're really keeping an ear out for.
Yeah. So I spend 2 hours with my new patients, and I'm often running late. So I've probably spent 2.5 hours.
This is good.
Yeah.
This is what we should be getting from our doctors.
I'm always, a little bit behind, but my patients are so lovely and just, know that is kind of my mode. So I really, start from like, how were you born, right? Where were you born? I've been looking up Superfund sites more and more these days. And
Do what?
Superfund sites, that's where
What's
the
that?
government tells us that there was a mass poisoning of
interesting.
a
That makes sense.
location.
Sure.
And they may or may not have taken steps to clean that up, but they at
Most
least,
likely not.
They at least acknowledged it. So that could be, just derivatives of chromium in the water or different pollutants that either mom or, the child was exposed to. I ask if your mom had amalgams, how was the health of your mother? Father too, but, most children are, the mother, being pregnant, there's also this maternal fetal.
Right. Well, we get our mitochondria from mom, right?
Exactly.
So,
There's so many factors there. And then I ask about vaccine history, just to understand how many and the response, because that's another stress on the immune system.
Well, even if one doesn't even want to go as far as to say it's a stress, it's an influence.
Yes.
Right. So this is where the whole vaccine thing kind of gets a little weird, where it's like we're supposed to pretend like there's no effect, and it's like, well, there's some effect. That's the whole point of that's the whole philosophy is that it's going to affect the immune system. So even if it's doing what it's supposed to do, we need to understand like what the influence is going to be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much there, right? I also ask about, have they lived in a moldy home? Do they currently live in a moldy home? Do they filter their water? We even distill water now just because of all the radioactive elements in water. I think about travel history, often another set of vaccines to travel, depending on where people travel to, if they got sick when they traveled. Concussion history is a big one.
Yeah, we can get a big infectious load traveling to a lot of
Yeah,
these foreign countries, right?
we can get them in the country too, but we're exposing ourselves
It's
to
just
another
totally different biome.
microbiome.
Yeah.
So that's more kind of that what I'm looking
Yep.
for. Surgical history, really looking at trauma history and emotional history. Even though on a first visit I'm just getting to know somebody, I try to create a container where they feel comfortable enough to share that with me. I always am asking my patients what their intuition is telling them.
Yeah, that's a big one. So
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? I don't remember who told me for the first time,
Yeah.
but the doctor said, one of the first questions I ask is I ask the patient what they think is wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, and sometimes they'll just tell you, even though they don't even know that they're actually telling
Yeah, they
you.
often do. And especially these sensitive patients,
Yeah.
it's amazing how they have a language and a knowing, and it's getting them more comfortable to trusting that knowing. Many people have been gaslit in medicine, especially by the time they make it to one of our offices.
Do you find that because when we think about somebody that's sensitive to foods, do you find this correlation between food sensitivities and chemical sensitivities to intuitive, energetic sensitivities? In other words, these are hyper aware. They're very perceptive people to the point where these things are actually causing some of these challenges. I seem to find that. I don't know if it's just my sort of pattern recognition brain trying to find something there, but it seems to be the case.
Yeah, no, I think the sensitivity in the physical body is a often catalyst to really strengthen their trust and their energetic sensitivity, and and beginning to trust themselves again and trust their body again, and realize that all of these feelings that they've had is their perception and ability to empathize or feel other people's emotions, or even feel the cell phone down over there, or so there's this sensitive, which is beautiful, because when these patients heal, they have their their inner navigation system they are really in tune with, and that's really, I think, the goal of healing. One of the many goals of healing. That's
the full empowerment, is when you can really start to trust your own intuition with this stuff. There's a lot of food sensitivity tests out there. I just kind of give you my take, and because I don't actually know. I've heard so many different arguments about this test that's testing for IgG and IgA and IgE, and there's another test that tests for this whole kind of soup of immune inflammatory cascades. Where I've kind of landed in this space, because you can take one person and you can do two different tests and they're going to give you kind of different results, right? And so I think a lot of people are like, what do I do with this information? My take is that there's probably some value to these tests. And yet, like every other type of test that we can imagine, there's false positives, there's false negatives, and there's just a lot of stuff happening in there. And I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, which is that the immune system is insanely complex. It's not this cut and dry thing. So I'm curious, do you find value in any of these food sensitivity tests? Do you use them? If so, like if somebody brings you something, what do you make of that? Because, I find some people are really bought in. They'll get this test result and they'll go, look, this one's red. This one's green. This one's yellow. Right. And and that matches up exactly what I feel. And so they kind of extrapolate to this whole thing, and they use this as a perfect map for their reality. How do you?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great tool for sure. I just, at this point in my career, and ask me next year, it might change, but I have steered away, from different food allergy testing. However, if it will help people make choices and decisions, especially in the interim, or if they feel like, they really need that information, of course I will make it accessible. I still love immunoglobulin testing. That makes a lot of sense to me. So IgA, IgG, IgE.
And is it because that's kind of a core aspect of the immune system and how it's communicating?
Yes. Yeah. Especially when somebody's in that intolerant state, they're often Th2 dominant, and they're going to be, really tagging and identifying, foreign invaders or antigens through B cell and antibody and immunoglobulin production.
Yeah, and I think there's certain aspects of the immune system, branches and components and sort of communication that we actually have a pretty decent grasp on. I wouldn't say it's complete necessarily, but we have a good understanding, right? And I think then there's a lot of murkiness in some of the other areas, and then of course how it all works together, which is a whole different thing. There's these testing, right? The IgG and E and A testing, and then it might come back negative for somebody, and they say, "Yeah, but I'm reacting." And I have these noticeable reactions. How do you kind of navigate that? Because I know you're kind of a terrain girl, and so there's stuff there. But I think this is where a lot of people get confused in this world, is they're trying to understand it and they get conflicting information one way or the other. But then again, there's sort of categories of whether you call it, maybe you're sensitive to yeasts and you don't even know it, or maybe you have sensitive to oxalates, or like there's all these categories of components of food that I think people can get really sort of sensitized to these sort of categories.
Yes.
So how do you help people understand how to even go about navigating that world?
Yeah. So again, at this time, I'm not testing as much. I honor, what people are feeling. I will test them if it will help them drive action. But my practice is really the gray zone. So I'm very comfortable with tests being negative, but we're still going to treat something because of clinical presentation and symptoms. And then I also use bioresonance and different principles of bioresonance and different technologies and muscle testing to also help me dialogue with the body. It's not a perfect system, but it definitely can help us drive therapeutic protocols when we're in the gray zone for sure.
So what are some of the, whether it's supplements, whether it's lifestyle factors, what are some of the things that you kind of find are pretty universal when it comes to helping regulate the immune system, get things back under control? You mentioned sort of cleaning up the parasite and the infection picture, right? There's obviously some gut components, perhaps some liver and detoxification stuff going on, but what are some of the general principles and or protocols that you think are pretty universal when it comes to this world?
Yeah. Nowadays, I really have to stabilize everybody before I even treat them.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's we stabilize the mast cells, so the mast cell membrane. And we also support H1 and H2 receptors in the body. There are H3 and H4 as well, but we don't have as many strategies for them. So we have mast cells that throw out a lot of mediators, one of them being histamine. Histamine, when it's overproduced, it will basically press on these receptors. So it's the H2 receptor in the gut, the GERD that's not H. pylori, right? That constant stomach acid production that's not, we can't blame on H. pylori, right? Or that allergic tendency that H1 receptors are kind of all over the body. So we're stabilizing the membrane.
And how do you do that?
Yeah, so we do that with a lot of different techniques now. I love peptides for this. I like BP-C157. I like KPV. I like microdosing GLP-1s. Those have actually been a big game changer for my patients. And these are doses like 0.05 milligrams. And Dr. Dina Moore gave me the confidence to do this with my patients after interviewing her on one of my podcasts. I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. I understand the science enough. And our mast cells have GLP-1 receptors. So when we are deficient or not producing enough GLP-1, because we produce it in our gut microbiome and our brainstem, that can also drive hypervigilance in our bodies. So I've also found that we need high amounts of salt in our water nowadays. And I saw that clinically. I'm like, people are testing for like 1,000 milligrams of sodium chloride like 4 or 5 times a day. And I think we're chronically dehydrated as a society, but I think we need the salt to stabilize the mast cell membrane, because when we're low sodium, then we degranulate more easily. And
I think about it like a battery. Like salt water conducts electricity.
Totally, it's important.
It completely changes the electrical conductivity, but also the structure of the water. Right?
Yes, exactly.
I like Maldon's, by the way. There's like no microplastics and
Jacobson's.
I'm saying that because because there's going to be questions like which.
Jacobson's.
Well, because for a while it was like a Himalayan, and then you're like, that's not so good anymore. It's Celtic sea salt, and I guess that's not so good anymore. So it's like we really have to get clear on that.
Salt your food, but you you also have to like take electrolytes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this next step. There,
Which, by the way, I would argue for fruit juices, vegetable juices,
yes,
eating fruits, right?
yeah,
Like these are the celery, like some of the whole thing behind celery juice, right? It's like
salty.
it's really just these salts that we're
Yeah,
getting, right, from
yeah,
these vegetable juices and fruit juices. I think
yeah,
are some of the best way to hydrate us.
yeah, definitely. So, um, peptides, salt, GABA actually can stabilize mast cell membranes. I also use natural compounds like quercetin, sometimes nettles, vitamin C. I also use different combination formulas, and then I will compound medication for, especially for very sensitive folks. So if that person with 3 foods comes into my office and they're underweight, I often will prescribe them ketotifen, which is a mast cell stabilizer and helps to heal leaky gut. Along the lining of the gut, and then they can start tolerating more
And
foods.
so is that something they take in sort of a limited window, and then they kind
Yeah,
of
yeah. Usually it's,
titrate
while
off?
we're healing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a forever strategy, but
Right.
it can be a long-term strategy as well.
Got it.
So
Okay.
usually 1 to 4 to even 8 milligrams, depending on how sensitive somebody is. But I usually start with 0.5 milligrams after, around bedtime, and then we can do that about 15 to 30 minutes before a meal if needed. I'll use cromolyn. I can compound that. Cromolyn is gastrochrome, and it stabilizes mast cells. It can help with that really overreactive, food sensitivity when you eat. Also DAO enzyme, that's going to just break down histamine. And then I will use different H1, H2 receptors, antagonists. So Claritin, Zyrtec, Allegra. Um, Sometimes I don't use Pepsid long term, but Pepsid was actually in COVID protocols because, COVID and spike protein just really hammers our mast cells. So that's a very short term strategy, if at all. And then I'll use trisalts, which are combinations of like potassium bicarb and magnesium bicarb and things like that that can alkalinize and help reduce acid in the body, but also stabilize our mast cells. So I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of things, but that's just kind of an overview. And then in that kind of stability, I'm also supporting the vagus nerve with B1, phoscholine, also the nicotine patch. The vagus nerve stimulators, and the vagus nerve actually also stabilizes our mast cells. So the mast cells basically create dysautonomia around the vagus nerve, but we need the vagus nerve to work to stabilize our mast cells. So it's a little chicken or the egg, but that helps. Also moving the blood, moving the lymph, that's important, getting people on binders. And then we can tackle gut infections. And a lot of people have undertreated parasites. It's a very rewarding, really rewarding kind of area to treat. We have protozoa.
Would you go after parasites right away, or is there some stuff that you need to?
Once I stabilize people, so I kind of say regulation is all of those things. Make sure that we get the bile moving, get the bowels
Start doing
moving.
a little cleanup, a little pre-cleanup.
Yeah, just so they, can tolerate those strategies. And then a lot of people
And they come out easier, right? Once you do a lot of that cleanup work and get things moving.
Yeah, totally. So a lot of people can have liver flukes. So when the bile gets congested, that can be a home base for fungus and flukes. People can have helminths in their gut. So we use different parasite herbs, or we even use meds for that. And then we also have a lot of protozoa that can look like amoebas, like that's the Giardia or Entamoeba or Blastocystis or Babesia, that you've had for 30 years and didn't know
a lot of
it.
this stuff is somewhere in the system that we can't really test for very well, right?
It's hard.
With standard medical testing, I would say, right? Like there's other approaches that we might be able to use, but some of this stuff.
There's like an imprint in the lab, so you
Right.
can just do like a basic blood chemistry, and you can look at eosinophils. So if they're above 1%, we'll look at total IgE as well, and if that's elevated clinically, IgE goes up when it tags an infection, obviously, often, and then that IgE stimulates our mast cells.
Right.
So it's like parasites create this Th2 dominant environment, and then the immune system easily basically triggers and signals the mast cells. And then the mast cells are already a little cranky because they're overwhelmed and hypervigilant from all the things in our modern terrain. So yeah. And then, kind of how I think about infections is, if you are living in a moldy home, there's got to be a way we deal with it, because it often just puts a blanket over a whole neurological, immune, gut, all of our systems, and it can make people really depressed or anxious.
Yeah.
And really not well. And so we deal with mold, we deal with parasites, we deal with long COVID, and we also deal with Lyme. And I feel like a lot of people's Lyme got reactivated with COVID. And then this is interesting, but I see it clinically that especially the larger parasites, when we kill them, they can release other microbes because they have them in their ecosystem.
Or metals or
yeah,
chemicals.
Yeah,
that are in
exactly.
There, right?
That's why we have to, it's like, parasites are pollutant sinks. That's another way to think about it. So if we've had a heavy, high heavy metal terrain or microplastics, or who knows, there's always relationships in the body. And so when we kill those larger parasites, we have to treat the Lyme and viruses that get released, and also mop up the chemicals.
Clean up on aisle 4, right?
Yes.
We really got to come.
That's why it's so,
down.
that's why I think parasite cleansing gets a little bit of a bad rap, because if you just buy a parasite cleanse, which, hey, I'm all for empowerment, just online without
or
any
even
of
just
this.
sort of experiment is okay, right? But you may not really know what you're getting out
just
of that.
please think about all of these layers, especially if you're not feeling well.
Right. Before we close out, I want to kind of just at least briefly talk about the energetic side, right?
Yeah.
EMFs, Bluetooth, wireless communication is more powerful and more prevalent than ever. How do you see that playing a role in the food sensitivity world?
Yeah, I think it's a big piece, and I think we'll continue to learn how big of a piece. I think that, we are in an unnatural environment often, and the more we come away from nature, the more our immune system is trying to figure that out very broadly. But mast cells themselves respond, and really every cell in our body responds to electromagnetic.
Including the infections, right?
Yes.
We know that mold mycotoxins increase. Like everything gets more virulent and just more hectic.
Yes, exactly. Right? So we have natural resonant frequencies in our system, right?
It's like biology responds to energy. Go figure.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's the higher order of things too in the body that I'm on always a quest to understand it. But just looking at the mast cell, so the mast cell, there's something that's documented called vibratory urticaria. And at our new center, I have a new patient who said that when she's on the shift wave, which is that vibrational, mechanical kind of like pulse wave, she gets really itchy, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, so.
And that's a histamine response, probably.
Yeah, so basically the mast cells respond to these vibrations. And then I have found some papers that see 5G as a trigger for mast cells. We know that 5G and other increasing kind of like this electromagnetic soup that is not biologically compatible, that's increasing, that can really, impact the growth and the virulence of different, mold in people's homes, or the parasitic infections in our bodies.
And the research is clear on some of this stuff, right? Like if you get the frequency right and the power right, all these wild things happen to biology, right? Even with glass, right? Like you can shatter glass with the right frequency, right?
Yes.
So it depends on some of these very, small pieces. Like these details matter, but if they happen to be right, then a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, for these folks who are so sensitive, they also feel all of this, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so they can feel the biologically compatible and coherent frequencies, and that's a big part of our work too, to bathe them in a coherent plasma field and coherent light and coherent sound, and have their body remember what that feels like.
The basic thing is just to be outside in the sun, right? People feel good, right? They'll go into a salt chamber, right?
Yes.
And so we can feel these things in various ways, and we may not be able to understand them and explain them, but a lot of people can really clearly sense that, oh, this feels good to my body. I don't know what's happening, but it feels good, right? So it makes sense. Dr. Christine, this has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. Tell people where they can find more of your work and what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, we just opened a new center down the street from you. It's Sela.center, and then they can also find me at drchristineschaffner.com.
Beautiful. Yeah. And by the way, I actually recently had my 45th birthday party at the Sala Center. Had all my friends come in and use all this
Oh,
really cool technology, and they
nice.
loved it. So
Mm,
just a shout out to anybody if you're in the Southern California region, definitely worth checking
mm,
out.
thank
So much
you.
fun, so cool. Although I will say about half of them went home and said, "I'm exhausted
Yeah.
after," and they had a blast. It's not like they did anything. It was all this beautiful thing,
They were
and
healing.
but that's just it. Like it
Yeah.
really did more than they realized, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it was really cool. So
Nice.
again, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I hope you're enjoying today's presentations. If you haven't yet grabbed your lifetime access to the entire summit, click the button on this page now to take advantage of this special event-only 67% discount before it expires. Dr. Shivani Gupta, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm really excited for this chat because it's we're going to talk about one of my great passions in the health world, which is Ayurveda.
Nice.
And it's, I think, maybe a little intimidating for some, especially from the West, perhaps even some from the Indian culture,
Sure.
who don't really understand this lens. But we're going to try to break this down. And my goal for this is really to open and expand our awareness from a different lens of health and how we can bring that in. Because I think as I was telling you yesterday, that there was concepts that it took me a while to learn from the integrative functional medicine world and the health world. And then I started learning and digging into Ayurveda, and I'm like, oh, well, this philosophy or this science actually explains what I learned over here. I mean, for example, in 2017, the Nobel Prize was given to 3 scientists studying circadian rhythm and chronobiology.
Yes.
And this is a topic that has been long understood in Ayurveda for thousands of years,
Yeah.
in Chinese medicine for thousands of years, and the West is just starting to sort of catch up and explain it in their own way. So that's just one example, but there's many, and so we'll just kind of dive in. And again, there's a little bit of a language barrier here, I would say, and I don't mean Sanskrit necessarily. I mean there's a way of thinking about health and life and death and disease that is very different. But as we start to incorporate some of these ideas, I think it really helps us understand the Western viewpoint a bit better as well. Would you agree?
True. Very true. Ayurveda's always had a pretty big, wide approach to life. It approaches spirituality. It approaches health on all levels. The goal is mind, body, spirit in alignment, but it's really our mental body, physical body, emotional body, and spiritual body, and the understanding of the energetics even of that.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't always get to get into that topic, because when we're
Right.
talking about health, we're so focused on the
On the
physical.
physical, right? And
And
maybe
so-
the mental, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
sometimes
part of
the
it.
mental, 'cause
Maybe.
we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a really important concept in Ayurveda that is Agni,
Yes.
spelled Agni, or Agni as it might look to the Western
Yeah.
mind, but Agni. Maybe you can just help me understand this, why it's such an important concept that when we lose it, it's kind of starts to lead to disease.
For sure. Agni is a very central concept in Ayurveda. Agni means your gut digestive fire. And so I teach it in a very simple way as, imagine if you had a campfire inside your body. To build a campfire when you're out camping, you're going to collect small, medium, and large branches. And you're going to build a fire using all of those things. You want diversity. You want it to be robust. You're going to build this fire and you're going to use it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. You're going to open up that fire and get it going so that you can really cook and transform your food. Then you close down the fire, but not completely, because you need to be able to rekindle it. Then you do the same thing for lunch and then dinner. And then at night, you kind of close down that fire until you open it back up for the next day. And so Ayurveda really looks at gut digestive fire as this most important gut digestion that you're going to build, honor, and manage throughout your life. And different things can happen that knock it out. Could be surgery, could be a trauma, could be anything big that happens to you, something stressful. And you can kind of get off your game. But what's interesting is when you look at gut digestive fire, it's pretty multidimensional. The simplest version is just gut digestive fire. But there is also this aspect of how it transforms our food into biologically what we're going to absorb, how our tissues absorb it and utilize it. And then an understanding that there's a final byproduct called ojas. And ojas is our goal. We want this vitality and this nectar that really provides us that wholeness and that nourishment that we crave. But if we aren't going through the steps, if we're just trying to target something from one direction or another, we might not build this robust, healthy fire. And that fire is everything. It's our metabolism. It's our ability to absorb nutrition. When we talk about food sensitivity, Agni is a key piece. Many of us have low, weak digestive fires. Some of us have overactive, sharp fires that are causing more inflammation and trouble. Some of us have dampness in that fire, and then we're getting more toxin residue in the system. And so understanding how to build a fire, honor it, and maintain it is the key from Ayurveda.
And one of the cool things about Ayurveda is that it's all connected. So if somebody has low digestive fire, low Agni, then that sort of implies that they're going to have low cellular fire, low Agni at the cellular level, and then even on the mental level, perhaps low mental fire. Maybe even low is the wrong word here. It's disordered. It's disorganized, right? And it's not going to be well balanced, right? And so I think this was a really key thing for me when I was looking at Ayurveda is understanding that it transcends all levels. And so and conversely, when we start to improve our digestive fire and get Agni more regulated and more appropriate, it's gonna translate to the cellular level. It's gonna translate to the mental level as well.
Correct. And that's the power of Ayurveda. Is in Ayurveda, we knew for over 5,000 years now, everything is connected. Gut and brain is connected. Gut and mood, gut and immune. So it is fun that now modern day science is proving
confirming it, yeah.
Everything that we already knew to be true.
We're still trying to mechanistically explain, which I get is kind of this it's sort of a reductionist way, which is another thing about Ayurveda is it's more, I would say, it's more feminine, I would say, in a way. Like it actually... It kind of doesn't need to define all of these little things. It's like this energetic quality.
Correct.
This conceptual framework is all throughout.
Yeah, and I try to explain that so much, because we have the pathways. We talk about inflammatory pathways, master pathways. We're so into all that verbiage.
Right.
But in the end, I'm saying Mother Earth has an intelligence. Our body knows how to interact with that intelligence. And when we allow for that, that's when we receive these incredible benefits that you cannot measure. I can't tell you turmeric will do exactly this, but what I can say is it's going to do what it's supposed to do, and then it'll do so much more.
Right.
As an example.
And Ayurveda is a lot about quality. Like, what are the qualities that this thing embodies, and how does that translate to ourselves and our constitutional, right? So these qualities, I think, really become, again, that's, I would say, more the feminine aspect of things, right? It's not the defining characteristics. It's rather what it's doing and the qualities that it's going to impart. And so if we want to kindle Agni, if we want a stronger digestive fire, what are some just generic like recommendations that you can give, whether it's lifestyle factors or, and I know this is a big question because there's certain herbs and there's certain, but strategies, ways to think about food, like in other words, drinking water, how much food to eat, chewing and digestion, like these types of things.
Sure.
What's going to hurt our digestive fire and what's going to help it?
Got it. Thank you for narrowing the question, because I was like, that
Where
goes,
do I go?
That starts from doshas.
Right.
That's that, and you go from there. But we'll go direct to what you're saying. So much of what I teach is how to eat more than what to eat. Because in the West, we think of it always as like, what am I eating?
Yes.
What's the diet? Just tell me what to eat. Is it no gluten? Is it no dairy? Is it no sugar? And I'll just force myself onto a plan.
This is we're so on the same page here, because that's always the question. We did a project called the Human Longevity Project and went around to the blue zones, and everybody always said, well, what do they eat? And I was like, no, it's not about that. They all eat different stuff.
Correct.
Right? And yes, it does matter what we eat. But it's like how they ate, when they ate, it's like that was the real juice.
Exactly. And that's a hard concept for us to get in the West. But Ayurveda defines it as circadian eating, living on a circadian clock. We teach that that's the most paramount thing we can do, is live in the rhythm of nature. And once you build that rhythm, it's rising with the sun, setting with the sun, but also defining those 3 square meal times. And so in modern science, people are talking about 1 meal a day and all these extreme things. I like fasting, and Ayurveda believed in intermittent fasting, but we never believed in extremes. We believed in really nourishing the body. So when I sit down with clients, I talk about eat 3 times a day. Don't cut all these meals out. Your body needs nourishment. It needs the fire to open up and then close. But let's cut out the snacking. We're not meant to leave that fire on all day long. That's going to affect the quality of the fire. Then we talk about when you do sit down to eat, focus on what you're eating. Like that's a big issue.
In other words, awareness. Like
Look at your food.
Being with the food in the process.
Smell your food. Breathe in that food. A lot of times we say take a moment and do a blessing or a prayer. That's just you taking a deep breath and dropping into the parasympathetic nervous system. And by doing that, you're really going to receive those benefits of that food.
Yeah.
So in my Ayurvedic culture and Indian culture, we always sit down and really focus on the food.
I learned this from Dr. Lott. It's like he believes in just like almost silence.
Yeah.
And which isn't to say that we can't eat in community and be with one another, but we're not, it's not the Italian style eating, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I really do sit down and quietly eat my meals so I receive those benefits. If I ever catch myself trying to do something else, email or something, I'm like, wow, so you're going to put air in with this food, vata energy. You're not going to absorb anything from this
And
meal.
by vata, you mean like sporadic, lots of things happening, like fragmented attention, that type of thing.
Exactly. Our attention can be all over, and then that food is not going to be well received. We know our gut, our stomach is never going to know that we finished eating and that we're complete. We're going to overeat. So Ayurveda says really bring attention to the food. Do not drink water 30 minutes before or after a meal. When you get to a restaurant, don't accept the ice water.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Absolutely say no and ask for room temperature water or a cup of hot water. So we want to kindle the fire.
So and look, I've heard some things like if you need some water, you can take a little sip.
Yes.
Hot water's better, but let's not gulp down water or most other liquids, right?
Correct. We want no liquids around the mealtime. We want all of your digestive acids, enzymes to come out and do the job well. And if we're just going to pour buckets of water on the fire, how does it do its job?
Because it dilutes the hydrochloric acid. Like there's a lot of things, right? And especially if it's cold, it's going to constrict the blood vessels. Like we want to open up, and we don't want to dump water on our fire.
Exactly.
Right.
And so Ayurveda talks about that. We talk about focusing on the food. We talk about when you're cooking that food, really pay attention. So when we're talking about restaurant food and travel, really be aware of what kind of a place you're picking because the energy of whoever's preparing that food is the energy that's going into that food.
Yeah, this is a real one and sometimes hard to measure.
Yeah.
If you get good, you can perceive it and you can become aware of it. But I think this is a really big one that we are just absolutely not paying attention to as a culture here in the West.
I agree. And I have stopped eating at a lot of restaurants, even some fast food restaurants that I thought were pretty healthy. I have noticed the food is so dead. It does nothing for me or makes me a little sick. And so I'm like, no, I can't even waste my time putting that food in. Because what happens is we're almost pouring garbage on top of our gut digestive fire. It doesn't even have the strength sometimes to process what we're putting in there. And then it produces what we call in Ayurveda ama, or this toxin residue. And that toxin residue is problematic. It's inflammatory. It creates metabolic waste. It creates this friction in the system.
It's like sticky, gooey, toxic, morbid waste. It's just like death in reality, right? It's like this gross stuff. Yeah. And we talk about toxins, we talk about metals, we talk about chemicals. Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget about this biological waste that actually can happen. And I love the term ama, I really do, because it's sort of non-specific. Like we don't have to get into the details, but we know what can create ama. Yeah. And we know that this ama, this waste that's in us, we need to get rid of. And we'll talk about some ways to kind of clear that in some methodologies, but continue. So we build this ama by these things.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to build ama. So the primary way is low digestive fire, to not have the strength to process our own food, and it's this excess waste. But it could also come from overeating. Sometimes if we're overstressed eating, the body's going to process some, and the excess just becomes this ama or toxin residue.
So we have a capacity for digestion.
Exactly.
And if you're sick, it's likely lowered. And constitutionally, we can talk about that. Yeah. Some people are going to have naturally more capacity for digestion. Right. And so if we overwhelm that, then we create more ama or waste.
Exactly. And so that waste product accumulates in our system over time. And this is why in Ayurveda we teach about annual detoxes or seasonal detoxes, because we want that opportunity to wipe the slate clean and start over again. The problem is in the West, we have not been taught at all about detoxing on a seasonal basis. We don't even think about it. We think we're fine all year round. Right. And so Ayurveda has actually given us beautiful self-care rituals that we can do every day that are gently detoxing, which is great. So I teach that a lot. Things like tongue scraping, oil pulling, every gentle way I can get us to detox and lighten up that system and move that ama through. But I also recommend bigger seasonal and annual detoxes to kind of wipe that slate clean.
There's a term, and I'm totally blanking, but it's essentially daily self-care ritual. What's that term that I'm?
Dinacharya.
Yes, dinacharya. And so this is like the daily practices that one instills, and it could be meditation, breath work, tongue scraping. What else? A little bit of yoga postures, like some asanas.
Yes,
right?
Pranayam, doing our deep breathing.
Or even just a walk in the morning.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It can be so simple. It's
You
just
can design your own.
Exactly. You want that lymph system to move. So however you're going to move it, you might lift, walk, yoga. We love in Ayurveda, but most people don't love yoga.
Right.
So it's however you're going to stretch and move your body.
Right.
We teach dry brushing because dry brushing will move that lymph
one.
system. And that's becoming trendy now, which is great.
Yep.
We taught Abhyang massage, which is self-massage of the body with any food-grade oil. I move that more into an evening practice because it's so soothing and so supportive.
But there are times a day, right? Typically morning and evening, right? 6 to 10 in the morning, 6 to 10 in the evening is kind of the ideal windows because that's our vata time, right? And this actually helps to balance out that vata, this movement, this period, right? So this is what's cool about Ayurveda is like it's like attracts like, and also it's the balancing of opposites, right? So we want to balance these things. So in this oil massage, this can be sesame oil, this can be sunflower, coconut,
almond, sweet almond is very nice.
And there's others too that are more therapeutic, we could say, right? And then there's tridoshik or a blend that is going to be good for just about anybody, right?
Yeah,
and these are really good practices. And tell me what the oil does. Why would we want to massage? And by the way, this is an entire body, right? This is genitalia to scalp to everything. We're just kind of, and almost the more the merrier, right? Like we really want to be liberal with this oil and doing it in a warm environment. Why is that a good thing to do?
So in Ayurveda, we teach that oil is so therapeutic, so good for the body. The more oleation we do for the body, the better and more nourishing it is. It's good for the joints. It's good for our digestive lining. It's good for everything, good for brain. And so it's beautiful that Ayurveda knew that. And so I love Abhyang massage. So I ask everyone to put a towel down, warm that oil if possible, and really gift it to the body.
Yeah, so it's an enjoyment process, right? It's not a thing that I gotta do.
Exactly, right? And it's so good for sleep. And one simple Ayurveda hack is when you put that oil on the top of your feet, it gives you even deeper sleep. So you're being generous with this oil when you put it on the body and going from your feet all the way up to your neck.
We used to do this for our little one when he's a baby. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we do massages on babies for sleep, but then for ourselves, we think we don't need anything.
Yeah.
But I always teach that when it comes to sleep, why don't you do a ritual for yourself and include this one so you can get that sleep? But what's great is our skin becomes so much healthier from it. Anytime you're reaching for the joints, so elbows, knees, and these things go in round circles, but you'll start to feel that your joints start to become more oleated and more functional, and you get that lubrication of the joints back,
right? Which
is really beautiful.
And all of our cells have this lipid layer to them, right? And especially as we get older, we lose some of this quality, in that part of our life. So bringing in a lot of this oil is just going to, especially in that time of our life, really, really effective.
Yeah.
Let's get into food sensitivities a little bit. Sure. How does Ayurveda, how do they approach something like food sensitivities? If somebody comes in to an Ayurvedic doctor or practitioner, and they say, I can only eat these 10 foods. What's the perspective? Like what's dysfunctional in that body from an Ayurvedic perspective? And how would you go about sort of unwinding that?
So many people who I meet say, I am on a special diet. All I tolerate is water and ice. And I say, what are you talking about? They're like, I can't eat anything. There's not a thing I eat that doesn't trigger me and throw me off. And Ayurveda really looks at that as, where is the digestion? Do we have sharp Agni? Do we have weak Agni? What's going on there? Is there an ama toxin buildup that's so significant that the body is just kind of overloaded and weighed down by this and thus causing more dysfunction with Agni? And then is the body and immune system reactive? So why is the immune system being reactive? Why is the system so kind of dysbiotic, but out of regulation?
Is this a breakdown of communication on a lot of levels?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And we want the whole body communicating beautifully, body, mind, and spirit. We can't have pieces of this broken off. And so when someone comes with food sensitivity, the automatic thought is, where is digestion? It's not the food's problem. It's truly a digestion problem, and on so many levels. So is it
not just the stomach, so to speak?
No.
Like it's digestion on all these levels.
Yeah, it's like, is it in the tissues that's the issue? Is it the immune system that's overactive and overreacting to what we're talking about here? Is it that ama is causing a miscommunication in the system? Or is it that Agni became so weak and kind of created this cascade effect? And so we look at it from a multidimensional lens and say, okay, really, we're going to want to first rebuild that Agni, rekindle fire. Then we're going to look at what's the rebuild. How do we rebuild Ojas in the system?
And this is like Ojas is kind of like life force energy, you could say. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, it's like this vitality byproduct of great digestion.
That's like the goal. That's the end result.
Exactly. Ojas is the total goal.
Yeah.
And I try to explain it as vitality, vibrant, nourished, whole. Every word you can think of that when you feel the most amazing, that's because you're producing Ojas.
It's like a healthy child. There's a ton of Ojas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can go through different seasons of our lives where we just get knocked out. It's happened to me. I've had surgeries, if you get sick, major trips, for example.
A few of these.
Yeah. And that's okay. That's part of life. But we can always come back and say, okay, what's my step-by-step plan? First, I'm going to love my gut lining. I'm going to bring in that ghee and allow it to rebuild the gut lining. Second, I'm going to rekindle Agni. I'm going to eat on time 3 times a day. I'm going to bring in seasonal foods and things like this. I'm going to really focus on what are my Agni practices. Then I'm going to really make sure I've cleared out Ama. Are there toxin residues accumulated? And I need to gently detox the system and clear it out. Maybe going on a very mono diet. We like the Khichdi diet in Ayurveda. You can pronounce it Khichari. Some people say it that way.
I like it with the D, Khichdi.
Khichdi.
Yeah.
So Khichdi is a simple porridge we make out of mung beans and basmati rice, very minimal spices. But I have a lot of clients where I will put them on a 3-day or 7-day Khichdi plan, allow the gut and digestive system to rest, let it reboot and rekindle everything in there, and then we can restart with the process.
And this is a good food. This sort of mono diet Khichdi it's easy to digest, right? That's one of the primary reasons. It's like, okay, let's just take the load off of the system.
Exactly.
It's a complete protein, right? So we're providing the nourishment to the body, which again goes back to what you said earlier, which is nourishment is key. We don't want to just take everything away, put the body under stress to try to handle things. We want to nourish it. And then it's got some of these spices which help
Cumin.
Well, coriander, cumin, asafoetida, turmeric, right? A couple other things that I'm told. Mustard seed maybe in there. Some other things, right? But and you can get these blended, right? Like you can go to Amazon and get Banyan botanicals. Like there's all. It's super easy these days. But it's supporting digestion, supporting the immune system, supporting the gut on a lot of levels. And so, and then we're usually it's the more soupy the better for generally speaking, so that it's that easy to digest.
Right.
And then we have usually ghee. And if some people want to stay clear of animal products, we can work into perhaps coconut oil or some other things, right? But that's. I love ghee because it's supporting, it's got butyric acid, it's supporting the gut, right? So, and it's nourishing the tissues that are probably dry, a lot of extra vata, there's all kinds of things going on there, right? So we stay on that and it's super easy to digest. And then you mentioned the sort of consistency, which again is sort of to damp down this vata, this chaos, this metabolic chaos, and by the way, going back to Agni and the digestion, I was reminded of Dr. Ladd, one of my great teachers in this space, talking about digestion on sort of this multidimensional level where when you see the world, you're digesting the world through your vision. When you have thoughts, you have to digest these thoughts. When you have emotions, you have to digest emotions. Food, you have to digest. Metabolic, cellular function must be digested. So again, I just want to really hammer this home that digestion is not just stomach, intestines. It is happening at the liver, it's happening at the cell and the mind and the visual context. So if our digestion is poor, our Agni is poor, then the ability for us to digest our thoughts appropriately, and we can have mental ama, mental waste, emotional waste, and that is the failure to digest these things appropriately. Like this was so profound to me when I heard this, and it makes so much sense. And we see this in the Western lens explained a little differently. But I instantly understood that when I'm dysfunctional and my health is not good, I don't digest emotions as well. Right. And it's like, that is really critical. And we're not viewing them as separate things. But simply by improving my physical, let's say, digestion as a concept, as a whole. Now it's filtering into all these levels.
It does. And it's such a profound concept, but honestly, it's central to the whole conversation around digestion and even food sensitivity. Because when I meet someone and they're like, something is off, automatically, I know there's a multidimensional effect.
Right. Yes.
Where are you in your life? How stressed are you? What's actually happening on a personal level? What are you consuming right now? So I wrote a whole book on Ayurvedic pregnancy a long time ago. And I love that in Ayurveda, we teach that everything the mother consumes will go to the child. And so that really clarifies it because we can think of it more as a easier concept that way. So when I was pregnant, I didn't watch the news. I didn't watch horror movies. I watched nothing bad. We already know intrinsically to insulate the pregnant woman and keep her away from additional stressors or bad things, because all of that will create emotions in her that will go directly to the child. But then when we're not in that phase, or anyone who's a man or anyone who's not carrying a child, we don't think of ourselves that way. We think of it as, I can just consume anything in the world, allow social media, news, all of this stuff to just come through, and I have to process all of that.
Right.
And couple that with the fact that most of us have weak digestive Agni fire. So mental fire is weakened, emotional fire is weakened. And so in my book, The Inflammation Code that I just wrote, I talk about a new concept that I got to. I taught all the Ayurveda 6 pillars. And the last one, I kept thinking, how do I teach people that stress alone will keep them inflamed and in these cycles? And so I called it mental inflammation because I was trying not to use all my Ayurvedic words too much. I was like, they're going to get sick of all my new words. But mental inflammation is that explanation of the fact that we are consuming so much, and all of that is causing the physical stress that's holding us back with our health. And so mental amma is a very powerful concept to understand, that we must stand guard at the door of our mind and our emotional health and our energetic self, and as well guard that digestive fire. What are you eating? When are you eating it? How did you source it? What is the mood of the person who's cooking it? What is your mood when you're consuming it? How focused are you on it when you're consuming it? All of that comes together to decide how you get to benefit from it.
Now, I want to be mindful that we're not overwhelming the audience
Sure.
as well. But I love what you're saying, because it speaks to the depth at which Ayurveda and the awareness can actually track a lot of this stuff. But you mentioned 6 pillars of Ayurveda. What are these 6 pillars?
So I teach first the doshas, which I renamed elemental design. In Ayurveda, the doshas is how we really define each person. Are you more air, more ether, which is vata? Are you more fire or water like pitta? Or are you earth and water like kapha energy?
And real quick, I'm going to pause you there, because I think what's really cool is, like, somebody says, well, am I fire? What do you mean by fire? But again, I would point back to the qualities. So this is how it's sort of easy to understand Ayurveda, aside from the language difficulties maybe. But if I were to say, you can look at me and say, am I fire? Well, look at my hair color. Right? My temperament, right? A little bit more aggressive, competitive, right? Go-getter, push things to the limit. These are qualities of fire. They're not really the qualities of water, right? So we can start to understand these qualities, right? And of course, the doshas, or these elemental sort of aspects, are usually, they're combinations of these things. But as you're naming these, I want people to start to think, what are the qualities of these things? And that's really what manifests.
True. So we like to give everyone a quiz and then help them understand which of these 3 elemental designs they are. We all have a primary and a secondary. Some people are balanced in all 3. We call that 3 doshic. And so it's so cool to show someone what their constitution is, and then use that as the guiding pillar from which we customize everything else.
And when you say constitution, we can frame it in the Western way, say genetic, right? It's like, in other words, this is who you are at your core.
Exactly.
And what's so cool about Ayurveda is, especially as you get to become a practitioner, but you don't even need to get down that level to start to understand the patterns. And you could meet me in 5 minutes and tell that I've got a lot of pitta.
Correct.
Like, constitutionally.
Correct.
Just because shapes of eyes, shapes of ears, tongue, body hair, eye color, hair color, body shape, how I'm showing up in the world, feeling into me and my energy. Like, it's just, it starts, and some people are a little bit more tricky, like they're a little more balanced. And some people maybe are out of balance to their normal constitution. But generally speaking, you can look at somebody and you can recognize what the qualities that they're working with, which is so cool.
It is really cool. I love it. I love understanding what someone is and then trying to see, am I right, just from the outside?
Totally.
And it's kind of like a fun party trick when you're like, you're fit that, I know it. So the constitutions are the first pillar. Then the second one is circadian rhythm, because Ayurveda taught us the circadian clock rules all things. So I teach about how do we bring circadian alignment into our lives. not just rising with the sun and setting with the sun, which we talk about a lot in the biohacking longevity space right now, but in Ayurveda, we take those same elemental designs and break that into your times of day. So for example, one easy one is 12 to 2 on the circadian clock. We teach 12 to 2 is when you should have your biggest meal of the day because your digestive fire is strongest to absorb the most nutrition out of your meals. And at night, that same fire is used to clear out your system. So 10 to 2, you're meant to be sleeping to clear inflammation, clear the lymphatic system and the glymphatic system. So circadian clock is a big topic.
I mean, you said midday, it's 10 to 2, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
10
okay,
to 2.
10 to 2. So, and which happens to be that the sun is the highest in the sky.
Correct. So
right?
it's bit that time of day.
Right. So these are, and what's cool about this, and we won't go too far, but they're universal principles.
Exactly.
Right. And so there's this natural cycle. And of course, we are a part of that cycle. And this is really the idea, is that we're marrying ourselves to the universal principles and the way that that life works.
Right. And to nature's rhythm.
Right.
We want nature's clock. Nature is the ultimate biohacker. So if we want ease when it comes to our health, align to nature. It's the simplest,
Follow her
free,
rules.
easy thing you can do.
Yes.
Out of all the things we have work to do on, that's the easiest one. So circadian pillar is the next one. Then it's gut health, because gut digestive fire is such a core principle to our overall health. Then I teach diet. Ayurvedic diet just means a circadian diet and how to eat and when to eat.
With the doshas, right? And
Yeah,
your
tied to your constitution. And some of us are meant to eat certain foods, some of us aren't. And so really customizing that for people. Then I taught about super spices because my whole PhD is on turmeric.
Yeah, you told me that. I think it's hilarious. You got a PhD on this one root.
Yeah.
And I think it's so amazing.
So I'm pretty obsessed with turmeric, and I think it can do
too.
pretty much everything for us.
Yes.
I also love ginger, ashwagandha. I mean, the adaptogens from Ayurveda are profound, cumin. So I love all the super spices, but my favorite child is definitely turmeric out of all of them. So I teach about that in the book because I wanted people to know there's so many ways to approach inflammation. And we think of superfoods, but we've forgotten this class called super spices out of Ayurveda. And then the last pillar I talked about was inflammation, mental inflammation. I thought, we think that we can just keep addressing diet. And sometimes we think we can get so strict on diet, strict on exercise, strict on everything, so controlling, especially when we talk about the longevity and health space right now. Intermittent fasting and so many different tools. And Ayurveda really says the stress alone will cause the exact result you don't want. And so if you can just pause a minute and really focus on wholeness and nourishment, then the whole system knows how to heal itself and be balanced.
Yeah.
So why not approach it from that angle? That one goal you may have, maybe you're not reaching it because of how you're approaching health.
Well, and that's again part of the doshas, right? So if we're rigid, there's really high, a lot of pitta. So we're just increasing pitta in this sort of dysfunctional way, right? And I think sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's often this almost intuitive outlet, like I need more pitta, so we kind of bring in more pitta, but we're doing it in the wrong way, and there's kind of this. We create more dysfunction because we're not addressing the real cause and the real issue.
True. And oftentimes we're trying to let off steam in the exact way that imbalances us.
Right.
So I'm a pitta, and we love spicy food. We love sugar because it has a cooling effect. We like alcohol because it'll dull and calm down that fire that's overstressed and we get burnt out and all these things. And these are the few things that completely imbalance.
Caffeine would also be one of those. Yeah.
Yes, we're caffeine addicts. There's anything that's like overblown that will make you over burnt out. That's our
like more stimulation,
vice.
More. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the counterpose for us is really walk in nature, cool down the jets, coconut water, sweet foods, but the ones that just cool us from the inside without causing more inflammation.
Right. And this becomes the superpower of Ayurveda in my view, is that when you figure out so we have Prakriti, which is your constitution, right? And then we have something else called Vikruti.
Correct.
And I'm probably saying those wrong, but
No,
they're generally right. And so this Vikruti is beautiful because it's like, okay, you have your constitution, which can be read via pulse or just taking a quiz, or I can just look at you and pretty much tell. Right. And that's kind of who you are at the core. That's your made up structure. And then this Vikruti, which is the imbalance, how you're deviated sort of from that constitution. Do you have excess vata right now? Do you have excess pitta? Do you have a combination? Is vata driving pitta? There's all these sort of ways to describe this, but I think the reason I really like this, which also can be read by pulse, and perhaps even through some quiz stuff, but that allows you to say, okay, where am I imbalanced right now? Right. Because I really need to address my constitution, but also this imbalance picture, because as we offset or balance this, then we can come back into alignment.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the goal. We are, like you said, born with our constitution, but in any given moment, in any given year, we could really be landing in another constitution.
Right.
And so my job is just to walk everyone home.
Right.
And when you've walked home, you feel like yourself again.
Right.
You feel in that alignment, and everything's much easier with your health. So those friction points are just really signals. That's what Ayurveda is saying. Even with food sensitivity, this is just a signal that's saying, you know what, maybe you're eating something, maybe you're doing something that's causing your body to react. That's just a sign that maybe digestion's off. Maybe we're eating outside of our constitution. Maybe it's circadian rhythm. But it's simple changes that can create the most profound impact.
And when we talk about food sensitivities from the sort of Western lens, integrative lens, we have food sensitivity testing. We have these idea of oxalates and,
Nightshades.
phytic acid and lectins and histamine stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one lens. The sort of Ayurvedic lens is if I'm naturally pitta, and I have a lot of pitta, and I have an imbalance of excess pitta, and then I eat a pitta food,
Correct.
then we're really throwing things more and more out of balance. And so the sort of food sensitivity side is this a pitta food, high pitta, driving pitta? Then that's going to be sort of my issue. And then what's the opposite of that? How do I calm pitta? How do I sort of bring in some of these qualities that are going to balance me out? And so maybe talk to me about that from the sort of Ayurvedic perspective of food sensitivities and balance.
We look at it as each of us has different types of food that are going to cause more ama in the system. So for example, a vata person who's more air and ether. This is someone whose food sensitivities or imbalances will manifest as bloating, gas. They're going to have this discomfort. They're going to have more anxiety in the system.
Chronic pain in the body.
Correct.
Right?
Joint pain because of the dryness.
Yep.
And so a vata person, we need to look at what are they eating that's causing all this imbalance. Sometimes they're eating hard to digest foods, legumes, nightshades, anything that's really drying to the system.
Dry and cool, right?
Exactly. Cold, dry. And the thing is, we're taught right now raw foods, diets, salads, smoothies. These are all best foods that we need to all eat. And what's interesting from an Ayurvedic perspective is that's completely untrue in Ayurveda.
So if you've got bloating, gas, indigestion, chronic pain, a lot of anxiety, perhaps depression, your sleep's erratic, right? Then salads are they're wonderfully healthy, but it's not for you right now.
Exactly. So we tell the Vata crew, you need cooked meals 3 times a day, warm foods, healthy fats, bring in ghee or avocado. Let's really ground the Vata energy. Let's really lovingly line that gut lining. Let's undo that dryness with warmth and nourishment.
No intermittent fasting, 1 meal a day, and then going to 3 meals. We want to be consistent. We want to be, right? It's like, so again, I'm just speaking to like the qualities and the energetics of all this start to really make a lot of sense. Instead of erratic all over the place, we just start to stay consistent. We relax.
Yeah, but it's hard for Vatas.
Very hard, especially because they gravitate, right?
Exactly. They gravitate towards, like, I had my coffee, my green juice, and my celery today, and I am fine. And then I got to dinner and I lost all steam. And you're like, okay, 3 square meals a day sounds easy for most of us, but it's actually hard for a Vata person. And so it's about that practice of understanding it. Maybe move to 2 meals a day and then 3.
Right.
And then with Pitta is so much fire that Pitta tends to run in flames. So Pitta people, our symptoms are inflamed, frustrated, angry, burnt out. Like, we get really overblown in our fires. And so a Pitta person is meant to eat those cooling foods, coconut water, yogurt, even cooling spices like coriander can help. Anything that kind of cools down a Pitta like a nuclear reactor.
And some of these foods are sort of obvious, like, jalapenos wouldn't be great for a Pitta, right? That's fiery. But some of them are a little bit, you wouldn't suspect until you get
Fermented.
deeper understanding, right?
Yeah. I mean, with the Agni person, with a Pitta person, fermented foods aren't good for us. And then spicy, hot, oily foods, alcohol as well.
Like these acidic foods drives up this fire, this heat, right?
Exactly.
And then, but sort of contrary to that, lemons are a little pitta, but limes, for example, they're very acidic, but they actually have a cooling effect, right?
Correct.
Things like mint may be an obvious cooling sort of effect. So again, some of them are obvious, some of them aren't. What's really cool is that there's lots of charts and ways to understand this out there on the internet, and they're all pretty accurate. Like, it's not a confusing map out there these days. There's not a lot of conflicting information.
No.
So it's pretty easy to understand, how do I bring in some of these foods? Again, from a food sensitivity perspective, how do I balance this, either my doshas or my imbalances, so that I can start to create more balance in the system?
Correct. And then Kapha is the last one. When Kapha is imbalanced, you're going to feel sluggish, slower metabolism, kind of weakened digestion, depression, not feeling yourself, not feeling energized. And so when Kapha is heavy, which is earth and water, then we're going to ask that you kind of let go of any of those foods that are dairy, gluten, sugar, any of those kinds of foods that could further dampen the system, because that's damp Agni, that's damp Ama as well, kind of a slow, high dose of Ama in the system. You've got like that sluggish, sticky Ama in the system. And so the homework, again, is warm cooked meals, not the cold salads. It's eating more of those igniting spices. So the same spices that Pitta should kind of cut down on, we increase in the Kapha. We want that cumin to absorb. We want more turmeric, ginger, anything hot and spicy. Black pepper, red chili pepper, everything hot and spicy, and get that system moving again.
I mean, spices are really kind of one of those really cool things in the Ayurveda where we just get them right and we consistently use them.
Exactly.
I mean, look, I have a theory about the spice trades way back when. It's like there's a reason we were using these for a lot of purposes when it comes to health and well-being. And we kind of lost our way with spices. We started gravitating towards just what tastes good and what goes with what, but we lost the deeper understanding of some of this stuff.
It's true. Spices are so healing. They're profound. And we use them daily in our cooking.
Right.
So much of what I want to teach people is just use cumin a lot more.
Right.
And you'll get these profound benefits. Turmeric, ginger, they're all so powerful. And we're living a pretty protein-forward lifestyle nowadays. So I think what we can do is also add in spices for the variety, but also the power of digestion to help us absorb that protein as well.
Right. Before I let you go, I can't not talk about turmeric.
Yeah.
Okay, you did a whole PhD on it, so let's just give us your dissertation. No,
Sure.
So I love this spice. Even though in the Western world, there's thousands of papers on turmeric as a root, on curcumin as these sort of curcuminoids, turmerones, and all these flavonoids that turmeric has. And then what Ayurveda has known for a long time is that there's these complementary herbs and spices that seem to have a 1 + 1 = 5 type of effect in the body. So maybe start to just give me what you got on turmeric and why you love it so much.
Sure. So what I love about turmeric is it's anti-inflammatory, but it really affects those master switches of inflammation, NF-kappa B, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, so many of the inflammatory pathways that then impact all the other inflammatory pathways. And it's powerful antioxidant, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, which to me is exciting because many of us need an immune system that works better, anti-H. pylori, anti-candida. It functions like this ultimate janitor. So it goes in the system and cleans out malignant cells, creates cell apoptosis. So cells that should have died go and die off. Senolytic cells, zombie cells, all those cells that are running around causing damage in us that need to go as we're aging. Turmeric goes in there and knows how to clean house, but leave the good stuff in place, which to me is a big deal because many of us have taken chronic antibiotics and things like that and caused a lot of damage. Versus turmeric will go in there and clean out the bad and leave the good. It helps with the gut lining. It's very pro-gut health. It's also helpful with obesity and insulin resistance. So it helps with that insulin sensitivity. It can increase GLP-1 in the system, which is a hot topic right now. But I love its neurocognitive effects. So we have a lot of science on how it impacts amyloid plaques, tau tangles, creates neurogenesis, new brain cells, mitogenesis, more mitochondria in our system. So I could go on from there, but I'll stop there because that list keeps going. It's a very powerful anti-aging support. It helps with cellular repair, DNA repair as well. What most people don't know is in ancient India, we didn't use the fresh turmeric as much. We fermented it, we used it as a pickle, but that's not how we used it. We dried it and concentrated it and used it as a spice. And we always cooked that with garam masala or ghee. So it was healthy fat or black pepper to increase the absorption. And that black pepper increases the absorption by 2,000%. And then finally, modern science has shown us that curcuminoids, those extracts, are what's significant at reducing inflammation. So I've played in that sandbox of extraction at the highest level for the last decade and seen that when we put this in doctors' hands, then we really see that power of joint pain and all these things being supported.
Yeah, to me, there's kind of a multi-pronged approach when I think about, let's say, using turmeric. It's what can we extract that's really, really powerful that we can concentrate and get an unbelievable effect. And let's not forget, it's a whole plant. So using turmeric as a spice is going to confer benefits that science doesn't understand yet, that Ayurveda can't explain the mechanisms, but explain the effects, right? So important to use the spice as it is, along perhaps with a concentrated sort of dose. And then the third component I would say is what can we pair with it to sort of get these multifactorial effects. And it seems like ginger really works really well.
Yeah.
Black pepper, as you said, and there's different kinds of black pepper that Ayurveda uses. But what else? I know you have a few others that seem to work really well.
Healthy fat is another one. You know, you're right. There is a synergistic effect to using the spices. So whenever we cook a dish, we're always going to use cumin seeds, asafoetida, which you mentioned, which I think is the best spice. It's so powerful for gut health. So I teach a lot of people remedies using that one. We have coriander. Then we have our turmeric, of course.
Fennel would be one of those.
We're going to use fennel. Fenugreek you can use. Cinnamon is also beneficial. Garam masala already has a big mixture of spices inside of it.
Go figure. Somebody figured that out thousands of years ago.
Spice mix. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
So it's really powerful. It's the spice cabinet, in my opinion, is the new pharmacy, F-A-R-M, pharmacy, that has all that power within it. And it's just about playing with it to get those benefits.
I love it.
Yeah.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I
Thanks
love this topic.
me.
I could go as deep as we could go and still be very happy.
Sure.
Tell people where they can, you have your new book, The Inflammation Code, which by the time the summit gets released in March, it will have probably been out for a little while, but still relatively new. Where people can find your book and more of your work.
For the book, my website is theinflammationcode.com. And then my website is my name, shivanigupta.com. And I'm on Instagram and socials, ready to answer questions anytime.
Dr. Shivani, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into the next interview, if you haven't already, please do us a favor and share this event with your friends and family and on social media, so that these breakthrough strategies and innovative healing modalities can reach as many people as possible. You just never know whose life you might change by sharing this cutting-edge health information. Jen Maleka, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I think you got your start with functional diagnostic nutrition. Is that right?
I sure did.
Like me. Great program, and I think we have since grown beyond that, much thanks to Reed and the work that he's done. I want to talk to you about food sensitivity testing primarily, because this is a very interesting topic where I think when I started, I really put a lot of weight in the food sensitivity testing, and we run the test and we get results and we say, these foods are really bad, these are kind of bad, and these ones are okay. And then for me, I was introduced to another food sensitivity test, a different one. And it's like, okay. And I was explained, by the way, for both these tests, one being the first one being the MRT, and then the other one being Cyrex Labs is kind of, and then I think there's other ones out there too.
Oh my God, there's like a million now.
Right?
Yeah.
And the explanations that I got from each of them, the clinical explanations and how they work, I was like, oh, I don't know what to believe, because I really bought into both the educators and the people that were kind of informing me about them and how they work. But then I just couldn't really piece together at that time what was going on. And I know there's a lot of people in that world. So how do we make sense of these various tests? How do we understand the value of them, and maybe which one's better or worse, or what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, what's the beauty of some of the training that we've had through FDN is that, we're not looking to treat the test results. We really want to treat the person, and looking for those patterns and correlations, and having an understanding that these different lab tests, whatever it is that you're using, whether it's, using cortisol saliva testing versus urine testing, or these different types of food sensitivity testing, they're just a different lens into the body. And so I started food sensitivity testing with the MRT, the mediator release test that we learned through that training. And that sensitivity testing is looking at different types of inflammatory markers like cytokines. So it's giving you this insight about inflammation triggers that are happening in the body related to food, which for me and my personal health journey was very insightful at first, because I was a healthy person. I studied kinesiology. I have a degree in kinesiology, the study of fitness, nutrition, and health. I was quote unquote eating healthy, right? Boneless, skinless chicken breast, broccoli, exercising. And I was diagnosed with skin cancer at 25. So when you receive a diagnosis like that at such an early age with zero explanations, it sends you searching for answers. And that's how I came across the functional diagnostic nutrition program. And going through some of that lab testing for me initially showed me that my body was having an inflammatory response to foods that were healthy. Like we can agree globally that a banana is a healthy food, right? Everybody around the world would say, oh, banana's full of potassium. It's got all these nutrients, but it's not necessarily a healthy food for everybody. So we have to differentiate between like what foods are right for your body so it can function at its potential between what is a generally considered healthy food. So if you're having like an inflammatory response to a banana, food sensitivity, then that healthy food is not right for you at that moment.
At that moment. And that's a key one, right? So
yes.
I think this is where maybe some people get hung up. There's sort of levels of understanding here. One is this food is bad, generally speaking, right? And I think a lot of people would categorize wheat or gluten in that. It's like, okay, that's just bad. We got to eliminate that. And then there's a sort of another level of understanding. It's like, okay, well, no, that food is bad for me and my constitution, my genetics, et cetera.
Yes.
And then there's a deeper understanding of like, that food may be bad for me in this moment.
Right.
In which case, as I sort of shift my terrain, as I fix the dysfunctions, that food actually may still be not ideal for me, or that food may actually start to be okay for me and good for me, right?
Exactly.
So there's different levels of understanding here.
Yeah. So from my personal experience, I eliminated some of the foods that were inflammatory for my body, which helped me accelerate the healing process amongst balancing my hormones and working on detoxification and a lot of those other elements. And then later on, fast forward, we had mold in our house. And that mold really affected my body. It triggered Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. And so then that sent me down a new path of exploration, which was really looking at food sensitivities and the correlations between an autoimmune process. So really getting into Dr. Datis Karazian's work about like molecular mimicry, like understanding that a little bit more. And then that led me to the Cyrix ARA10 test, which he's done a lot of research.
Which is another food sensitivity test.
Another type of food sensitivity test, yes.
And what are the differences between those two?
So the Cyrix is looking for IgG, IgA, so looking for food antibodies. So is my body, feeling attacked by this food? Essentially, it's producing an antibody against it. And then in his work, he talks about how some food molecules also look like molecularly, the structure looks like tissues in the body. So we'll use thyroid as an example, like a gluten molecule looks very similar to thyroid tissue. So for those individuals that have like a thyroid autoimmune process going on, like Hashimoto's, if you eat gluten, the body sees that, and then it inversely attacks the thyroid tissue more because of the molecular structure is so similar, right? And so there's a lot of work and information around what we call a lectin sensitivity related to autoimmune disease, which is where the autoimmune paleo diet kind of emerged and as a therapeutic modality in that sense.
So it's a sort of response to this idea that lectins are a problem for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Because of the dysfunctions that are happening in the body. I mean, that's the other piece to this, right? Which sometimes may get left out, which is it's not that lectins are bad. Lectins are a protein that this person may have a difficult time breaking down into the amino acids. And because of that, the body's reacting. It's starting to create these antibodies, and it's starting to tag as something as a threat. In which case, we have tissues that are also have that same sort of amino acid sequence or code, where the body goes, okay, well, it's the same. Let's tag that too.
Exactly. And as I kind of simplify the explanation for the clients that I work with, is that when your body is in a pro-inflammatory state, so it's highly inflamed and it's very reactive, that's when these like lectin proteins in foods can become problematic. So they're not always problematic. And again, it's circumstantial and situational in this moment based on what's going on in your body. And in that work with my clients, what I've started to notice is that a lot of them are on the autoimmune spectrum. So the autoimmunity is this spectrum, and Dr. Amy Myers talks about this really well. So does Datis as well. And that you have signs for autoimmunity for years leading up to actual clinical diagnosis. So signs for autoimmune condition or process being in place could be like one symptom once a week. And then it just kind of like progressively gets more frequent until eventually in our Western medicine, it becomes so bad that there's a clinical threshold for diagnosing. Right.
Yeah. But food sensitivities being one of those sort of things that we can say, we're kind of on our way here.
Yeah. So with the Cyrix ARA10 food sensitivity testing, because it's looking at IgG, IgA, I see with my clients this like very strong clinical correlation with a lectin sensitivity response, basically. So we know then that the body is having this physical response to some of these foods. And those foods are inversely, like, they are then creating more inflammation within the body while it's trying to heal. So it's like hindering the healing process. So it is very therapeutic and helpful to take those foods out for a period of time to reduce that demand or that stress that's happening in the body, to allow it to heal. And then eventually some of those foods can come back in. And I honestly, like, when I was going through healing my Hashimoto's journey, I didn't think that some of the foods that showed up on my testing were problematic necessarily. But I took them out anyways because I saw it on paper, right? That it was actually, there was an inflammatory response that was happening, like nuts, right? A lot of people think nuts are healthy food. They're great sources of fats and proteins. And I took nuts out. And then as I actually reversed my Hashimoto's within 6 months, which is awesome. We can even talk more about that. But then I started reintroducing foods, and like I started to recognize like walnuts specifically.
I was going to say, sometimes it's a specific nut. For me, it was cashews.
Yeah.
And I love cashews.
Exactly. So I was like, oh, walnuts like don't really agree with me just yet. Now I can eat them a little bit and like not have a problem necessarily. But again, it's looking for those clinical correlations. And sometimes we don't know until we remove something that it's problematic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the, well, before I get into that, you said spectrum, you said autoimmune spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed is in some people, it's one autoimmune condition, right? Whether it's MS or rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's or whatever the case is. But oftentimes it's not just one. Some people may identify that, and there's other autoimmune tests that you can run. Cyrex has a great one. I think it's the Array 5 perhaps, where you start to notice, oh, I thought I just had Hashimoto's, but there's actually autoimmune antibodies in a number of cases. So this is something that I'm curious, did you ever run into that on your side, or was it just Hashimoto's?
So I actually didn't do that test on myself. I've done it on other clients. And the reason being is exactly to what you said, is that if the immune system is having an overactive response, an autoimmune process, it is likely that it's happening in multiple places and tissues of the body. It's not isolated to just one area. And that's some of the kind of like the gap or the pitfall in our Western like medical model, is that we it's really reductionist and siloed versus understanding and or embracing the fact that the body is a complex network of systems that are all interacting together. So if it's one area is being affected, like hormones or digestion or detoxification, there is a cascade effect happening in every single other tissue and organ and bone and process in the body. Right.
Which kind of goes back to the point that you made about not treating tests. And the way I look at a lot of these functional tests that we can run, there's some that are, let's say, more diagnostic than others.
Yeah.
In other words, some of them provide great information, but they still point back to the same thing, right? And this would be one of them. I would say it's like, once we recognize we have one autoimmune condition, we're not going to treat 4 of them. We're going to treat the underlying issue. We're going to address the underlying dysfunction that's leading to 1, 2, or 3 or 4 autoimmune sort of cases popping up. Talk to me about some of the clients that you've had that have food sensitivities. What are you kind of noticing? What are some of the sort of clinical pearls that you've come up with?
Yeah. It's so fascinating. I just want to say, as you were saying that, the thing that was coming to mind is our body is giving us trillions of data points.
And that might be understating it. It probably is, right?
Probably every second, essentially, right? And our actually scope of measurement and ability to analyze all of that data at any point in time or collect it is so minimal right now.
This is such a key point. Time of day changes the picture.
Yeah,
right?
which is what's so wild to me about the conversation happening around AI right now, and how
100%.
And how doctor in your pocket is coming and AI can do all these things. It's actually literally limited and impossible because of the number of data points that come out of the body. And so going back to your question is, I have a lot of the clients that I work with, they've already been to multiple functional, holistic.
It's like every person on the summit, including myself. It's we get the ones that have run the gamut.
Yes,
on this stuff.
Run the gamut. And they're being told that everything's normal, or that they're being diagnosed with something that's not actually the problem. So, share a specific story of a client that went to a really well-renowned functional medical hospital system in Ohio.
Cleveland, maybe.
And, you know, young individual, she was like in her early 30s and like generally healthy, exercise, like more advanced than the general population, I would say, trying to eat healthy. And her main complaints were weight gain and being bloated all the time. And she was about to get married and she's like, I don't want to feel this way, you know, getting married. And she was diagnosed and treated for SIBO 3 times with no resolve to the issues.
In other words, SIBO was there. Like they may have ran the test correctly and it could be present.
Correct.
Yeah.
But like, that doesn't mean that that's like the root cause of the problem. Like
Totally.
you still have to ask the question, well, what's contributing to the circumstances? What's happening in the rest of the body?
Why is this coming out?
And like a lot of the testing around all of that was blood testing. She was getting a lot of blood testing done. I think they probably did a breath test for the SIBO portion of it. But like those are just some lenses into the body, right? Like if we think about the trillion data points that the body is producing at any point in second, like you're only grabbing like a fraction of data from blood test or a SIBO breath test. So that just means that there's more to be explored.
It's only part of the clinical picture.
Exactly. And so my typical like approach when I work with clients is running a series of lab tests to look at the hormones, immune, digestion, detox, energy, nervous system, all at the same time to get a greater picture of what's happening. Look through multiple different lenses, through urine testing, stool sample testing, food sensitivity testing. And what we discovered for her specifically was we did a Dutch test. So she was estrogen dominant. Her detox system was clogged. Her liver was congested. So that was probably part of the piece of the puzzle with her weight that wasn't coming off. We did a GI map stool sample test. Her gut was a mess. She had H. pylori going on. So we know that
Which in and of itself, by the way, can just set up this downstream dysfunctional map that it's like that becomes the key piece.
Exactly.
And we may need to address some things downstream.
Yes.
But like that's what's wild about something like H. pylori, which is probably prevalent in 60 to 70% of people.
Oh my gosh.
And with people with chronic issues, it's like 80%, I would say.
Yes.
Like it's wild how
and
simple it can
the
be.
conventional medical model doesn't want to like acknowledge that it's a problem necessarily, but there's a ton of data on it about how it's linked to ulcers and all kinds of things that we could go down a rabbit hole
And just
about.
maldigestion, right?
Yes.
Due to the hydrochloric acid issue and
Exactly.
I mean, it's like simple.
Yes, exactly. But one of the biggest findings for her related to the bloating was that she was reactive to beef. So she was doing her best trying to like adhere to like a healthy perspective of eating grass-fed, organic, hormone-free, good quality beef. And even with all of those efforts, her body was having an inflammatory reaction to that. And so that little tiny clinical pearl changed her life. She cut out beef and she instantly started dropping weight. Her bloating stopped. She focused more on gamey meats like venison and bison instead, and different protein sources. And she got down to her pre-college weight for her wedding and felt great. And now she's been able to add beef back in, and it's like not a problem for her anymore.
And this is I mean, so what comes to mind when you say this is like substitute beef in this case for any food, right? Any food, especially if we're eating a lot of it, it could be the thing that's actually driving the issue. And then the other thing that comes to mind now is all the discussions around GLP-1s and things to create signals and change the weight. And, you know, of course, you have dieting strategies, which have been, you know, go back eons, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, this inflammatory signal that was constantly being provided was really the problem. It wasn't how much, it wasn't maybe the time of day she was eating. It wasn't, there's like all these things we can point to, but when it comes to a food that's creating this level of inflammation in the body, it just drives all the dysfunction.
I mean, I had one client come to me. We did that Cyrex food sensitivity test. She was sensitive to 82 foods.
Wow.
82 foods. And the only thing that she wasn't sensitive to was animal proteins. This was the first time I ever saw that clinical validation to say, this person needs to be on a carnivore diet because we've got to control this inflammation that is happening in her body. And she was like mid kind of like menopause journey at the time. She had fibroids that were so large she could feel them. They were palatable for her. Couldn't lose weight no matter what it was that she did. So we put her on a carnivore diet. Once we saw this information from the food sensitivity test that guided that direction, right? Otherwise, you're just guessing sometimes with diet stuff. She dropped 20 pounds in 1 month.
Wow.
Just from taking all that inflammation out of her body, and her fibroids shrank.
Mm-hmm. So how did you decide whether to do Cyrex or MRT in that case?
Right now, just with the population that I work with, I pretty much focus on the Cyrex, looking at that IgG, IgA. A lot of the work that I do now as a practitioner is actually mentoring other health practitioners about the understanding of who their ideal clientele are, and like looking for some of those like patterns that you're going to see consistently come in. That helps you to streamline your practice and just know like that's going to be your starting point.
Right.
So Cyrex is always where I start.
Right.
You know?
And what's interesting about the testing, I think this is where it really does need to be practitioner led, but even the practitioner may not have a great understanding or enough experience with this stuff, because a lot of the tests, again, it's just one piece of the clinical picture.
Yeah.
Two, none of them are perfect. They're going to miss stuff. There's stuff that they can't we don't have the technology to understand or to get. And again, if we're treating the test, that becomes problematic, right? So there's just a bunch of caveats when it comes to tests. And as a clinician, sure, it would be great to have 28 different tests for me to pull information from and build my sort of clinical picture. But obviously that's unrealistic. And so there becomes this kind of balance of like, how much do we rely on testing? How much weight do we put in the testing? And how do we use that testing to build our clinical picture? And I've even had cases where I don't need any testing to get started, and we can actually move the needle to such a large degree because I understand the history, the lifestyle that I'm looking at, and how we can make some changes there. And there's universal truths, right? Where if I can help this person improve digestion, then it improves hormones, it improves detoxification. Like there's just things that need to be done, right? And so anyway, I just sort of state that not to say don't do any testing or do all the testing. There's limitations, there's trade-offs, and there's sort of ways that we can do it wrong, and there's things that are missed.
Exactly. And I think that's so important to say, because testing is a tool, right, for us to utilize. And I think this is where some of our background from FDN comes in, is that this perspective, like through the functional diagnostic nutrition training program, is it's a complete methodology. So it's a way of thinking and the tools to go along with it.
Right.
So we're getting the lab testing tools that go along with it, but it's how you actually look at somebody. In our mentor, Reed Davis, I just remember him always saying in the training, like, you're constantly forming an impression about somebody. So to your point, you can be forming an impression on somebody based on their history. Like, if I know somebody was a C-section baby, they weren't breastfed, they had ear infections or rounds of antibiotics as a kid, and now here they're at 45 having digestive issues and hormone issues, we can see that string, that connection all the way through. And there are some general truths that we know that their body's inflamed, and if we do some foundational work, they're definitely going to like make improvements, right? I think for the average person out there, that what inspires some of the motivation to actually make the lifestyle changes, especially for the population I work with, like these
data.
These busy health-minded professionals that they want that validation. Like, I can't tell you how many times when we do the lab testing, people are like, I knew it. I knew that was wrong with me. And like, my doctor wouldn't test that thing. Or they just have this sense of relief that they're getting affirmation that everything that they knew intuitively about their body that's not right is showing up on paper.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the most important aspect of the test, is just so they can see what's really happening, or even see that it's not happening.
Yeah.
And we can take a different path, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that we're seeing so many more food sensitivity cases, and they're becoming so much more prevalent today?
Oh God.
And I know that's a big question, but just generally speaking, like, what's your impression of this reality at this point?
Well, the place that we are recording this interview right now is such a perfect example. We are in Vegas, which is such a reality check for what real life is like, right? Because healthy people like us don't live in this world all the time, but this is the world that people are living in all the time. And as I've been in this industry and doing this work since 2012, which is wild to say that it's been that long, observing what's been happening and the evolution of things, there's so much talk out there about like the root cause of stuff. which is a fascinating, I think, term.
It's my favorite word that I like to negate poo-poo and like get rid of on
Thank
right
you.
away.
Yes, we're on the same page with that because there really is no root cause. And what I've been saying lately is that I always like to run things through a primal perspective filter. And so if we really think about like how did our ancestors live in a primal perspective and what's different now, even when it comes down to our food quality and what's disrupting our sleep, like I think that why we're seeing so much disruption, like the single actually root cause in my mind to this point in time is the concept of toxins. And I would put EMFs and radiation exposure in the category of toxins. Because if we think about our food supply, so what is in our food supply that is affecting the quality of our food? It's toxins, it's additives, it's chemicals, it's toxins, right? What's going on in our air? What's going on in our water? What's going on in this room that we're sitting in right now doing this interview? If you were to actually strip away toxins, we would return back to a natural way of living.
And even just the adulteration of the food, right?
Yes.
Creates this added level of toxicity.
Yeah.
Not only because there's toxic byproducts that can get produced by heat and pressure and some of these things, but also the fact that they become more indigestible, they become more difficult for the body to handle, which then creates toxins. So it's almost like a primary toxicity and a secondary toxicity that gets created by this sort of overproduction of the food supply.
And that's just food. I mean, we think about like all the toxins that we're being exposed to in this room right now are wreaking havoc on our digestive system.
So the light, the EMFs, the whatever's coming out of the floors, the
fragrances,
chemical cleaning products.
the chemical cleaning products, like everything literally right now is burdening our liver, which actually plays a major role in digestion. It's stripping the intestinal lining, the integrity of our gut tissue. It is impacting our hormones, like our estrogen, progesterone balance. Our cortisol right now is being affected by all of this, which also, like, we have to remember the body is this complex network of systems. They all work together. And the EMFs and the radiation that's happening right now are interfering with our cellular communication and the ability for our cells to actually do their job. Right. And so there's been a rapid acceleration of this, as we know, since like the 70s, even earlier on, since industrialization, World War II, that's been happening so fast. And as a human species, yes, we evolve, but we evolve slowly because of the length of our lifetime. So, animals or organisms that have a shorter lifespan, they evolve quickly to their environment. And so with how rapidly things are changing in the world, like we're just not we're not evolving as fast. We can't keep up. So the burden keeps building on the body. And because of all of that mixture, that melting pot of things, the body's starting to break down. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the food sensitivities as a signal of that, right? There's a lot of other signals that are happening, but food sensitivities are just one signal of that problem.
Yeah, I like to think about it as kind of this hyper novelty. Mm-hmm. In other words, the world is changing so fast. And yes, biology, and I don't even just mean humans, I mean biology itself can respond to those changes. Yeah. But we're outstripping that pace, right? We're moving things too fast. And this not only it comes from the chemical and toxicity standpoint, but just the way that we're living our lives, mm-hmm. right? Think about, I grew up in a time where we had a computer, but it wasn't really used. Like I did some typing on it, right? Cell phones, mm-hmm. right? The constant dings and bells and whistles and notifications, emails, this mm-hmm. constant pressure from the outside world. So it's this hyper demand and this hyper novelty that is creating, it's going at a pace that biology cannot keep up with and thrive. We can keep up with it, but we're just not going to thrive, right? Yeah. And this is we have this evidence for transgenerational epigenetics. In other words, our genome can change from generation to generation. Yeah. But when you're going too fast, then you're just going to create problems. Yeah. And that seems to be what's happening.
Yeah. And we, at the core of it, we are animals, primally animals, right? Mm-hmm. And we see animals that are in, like at the zoo, right? So animals that are in captivity, they don't thrive as well as animals that are in the wild. And I think that's a great analogy to use for what's happening with us as humans is that in our modern day world, in our homes, in our big cities, and our buildings, we have removed ourselves from the wild and we're in captivity and we're not thriving in this artificial environment. Like that's not how our body is necessarily meant to be. So like, that doesn't mean that we're all going to go like give up our luxuries of our home and our comforts of living and go like,
Go off grid.
Go off grid.
Yeah.
But
I like the grid, by the way. I enjoy the grid. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to find a balance of that, and I think that's the most important part. Like, even if it's, in the 2 days that we've been here at this conference in Vegas, like I got outside for a sliver of time this morning at sunrise.
And you probably didn't even touch the grass. You were in shoes still, and you just happened to have that natural light.
Yes, exactly. Just to get that natural light to hit my
breathing
eyeballs.
in car fumes and all the things that are out there, right? Yeah.
And we can just start to be conscious and aware, and like a lot of our consumer choices can drive change. So one of the things that's new for me that because I travel a lot for work, is now I call ahead of time and I request allergen-free or hypoallergenic room so that it's...
I didn't even know you could do that.
Exactly. So now you know next time. So they, reduce the cleaning chemicals that they're using, like no fragrances in the room. And that helps me like support my body while I'm here doing these things. So there's ways that we can mitigate it. But just think if more consumers started to like call hotels and make those requests that like... those demands are going to happen. Like then people are going to, it's the consumers can shift the change. They're driving it.
Well, and it's funny because it's probably, when I said I didn't know you could do that, it's probably only become that way. In other words, it's an availability because so many people are sensitive that's now becoming a request. That's becoming a thing. And now we can actually sort of take that into our control. Even somebody that's not noticeably sensible, we can just start saying, or sensitized, we can just say, this is what I want.
Exactly.
Right? And we can drive that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And a great example of that is I went to a conference recently and I called ahead of time to request that. And they're like, oh, the whole third floor is a dedicated allergen-free floor.
Interesting.
I was like, that is amazing. That's available. So we can start to drive these changes as consumers. We can vote with our dollars, as we always say, to start mitigating this stuff. And I think, again, so like if we take that back to food sensitivity testing, we can empower our clients, right, or our patients or like the public to understand their body better. So then they can make informed choices and requests, because then I guide my clients on like, how do you go to a restaurant? You're still going to live your life. You can't live in a bubble. That's not realistic either. But now you can make informed choices and ask for modifications when you're at a restaurant so that you can eat the foods that are right for your body, so you can function at your potential at any given place and still live your life, and enjoy food. Because yes, while we might be avoiding or eliminating some longtime favorite foods, when you create that connection of what I'm eating makes me feel good, that also then starts to shift the mindset or perspective that like food is enjoyable because I'm not feeling like awful afterwards.
So as we close out here, maybe you can just kind of give me an overview of some of the things from a lifestyle perspective that you like to point people to when they're overly sensitive to food, chemicals, or perhaps even their own body and have autoimmune conditions. What are some of these core principles that you like to instill and just make sure that they're really making a focus of their life as they start to recover from these things?
Yeah. That's a great question, because coming out of the fitness industry, which is where I got started, and also just in our Western world, there's such an emphasis on diet and exercise. Like diet and exercise is the answer to everything, right? Like move more, eat less in the traditional model. And I like to say that we actually need to value sleep more than diet and exercise, because sleep is so undervalued or like not paid attention to. And sleep is the quality of sleep that you're getting and within the right window according to your circadian rhythm. So going back to that primal perspective of how did my ancestors live? They were not staying up, till midnight.
Instagram.
Okay. They were going to sleep pretty shortly after the sun went down. That is what gives our body the greatest capacity to heal on a daily basis, to repair all of our cells, to like do the internal work, to detox all these massive toxin exposures that we're encountering. And so I would say like that's one of the number one lifestyle factors that I have my clients focus on, and is, in this world, it's wild of like just from the way that we're conditioned to think, like we need to perform, like we have to stay up late to like, get through work deadlines, or like that's when the kids are asleep, so that's when I have my self-care time. We have to kind of shift that perspective and give your body what it needs so that it can be at its greatest capacity. So really working on that component, making sure you're asleep by 10 p.m., not in bed by 10, but asleep by 10 p.m. And then,
by the way, that's a good rule of thumb, right? There's some people that may need to, that their circadian rhythm sort of dictates 9 or 9:30, some maybe even 10 for some people, because we know that there are genetic variances and of course seasonality variances, but I love this rule of thumb. That's kind of what I stick to as well, is basically 10 o'clock is kind of your objective. And then you see where your body really wants to just like.
And thinking about it like a bank, like coming here to Vegas, I knew being here for work, I was going to be up past 10, maybe a couple nights. So the days leading up to this trip, I was in bed and asleep earlier, like 9:30. So I was like banking sleep, knowing that I was going to get a little sleep depletion here, right? And then the second piece of that is like the sleep quality. Right. So once you're like nailing that like optimal bedtime, now we have to look at sleep quality. Are you sleeping through the night so the body can actually like do its job?
Right. And then we have some trackers out there, whether it's the Oura Ring or other sleep trackers, to kind of tell us the quality. Are we getting enough deep sleep, right? And that these are all variables, right? Like some people will naturally get more deep and then less. But it's like really just starting to sort of map that out for ourselves. And of course, how we're waking up, and are we waking up feeling rested and feeling good, right?
Right. And so many people think that it's normal to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Guys, that's not normal. Right. It's really not. It's usually a signal for like blood sugar drops or like detox issues. Like in Chinese medicine, they track this really well with the body clock and knowing what organs are doing what things in the middle of the night, which can be insightful. So we want to resolve those things, because when we're waking up in the middle of the night, we're interrupting the body's like deep healing process.
Right. Basically. And that's part of the circadian rhythm, right? There's certain sort of hormonal signals from the hypothalamus and the pituitary that regulate the body if it needs to go pee, for example, right? And so if you're waking up to go pee, well, that could actually be a signal that your circadian rhythm is off and your hypothalamus and the pituitary are sending the wrong signals at the wrong time, and we're not being allowed to sleep. So it's not a matter of did you drink a lot of water or not. It's the body's losing that signal that it is time for rest, and it's now waking up because the bladder's being full, right? Exactly. So there's lots of sort of reasons for that, but really being mindful that that's not normal. Yeah. Like it may be common, but we got to shift that, and there's ways that we can do that, right? So sleep, big one. Sleep.
And then the second one I'm going to say is exercise. So
and define exercise for me, because what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So what I'll say is that it's reducing exercise intensity, and again, making informed choices to work with where the body's at and what it needs in that moment. So again, having come from the fitness industry, like it was all about grinding away at the gym, right? That's what
hour and a half, 5 days a week. Right?
Like that's what gets results, is you got to grind harder. And I used to train for fitness shows and all that stuff, and like run marathons. And what I find in my clientele that I work with is that they're actually in such a depleted state, like their exercise intensity is depleting them even more.
Because exercise is a hormetic stress, right? Which is the idea that a little bit is good, perhaps a little bit more is even better, but then at some point, if it's too much for that individual, then it starts to detract from our health. Right?
Exactly.
So bodybuilders different from somebody with autoimmunity and cancer.
Right. So generally speaking, exercise is a positive.
Right.
And yes, we want to be moving our body every day, but the way that you move it should be dependent on like what does your body need exactly.
What capacity do you have to recover?
Exactly. Right. And I had to learn this lesson the hard way.
Me too.
So when I was, again, we'll go back to that Hashimoto's diagnosis, I was doing all the things. I went autoimmune paleo diet. I like ramped up my supplement protocol. I'm like castor oil packs, working on detoxing my liver, working on the mold mitigation. And I was making marginal like progress. But the thing that I didn't change was my exercise. I was still running a mile to the gym. Mm-hmm. So running is a high intensity exercise, Olympic lifting, and then running home. So talk about high intensity for a prolonged period of time. And I had to have a little talk with myself about that, recognizing like this is the work that I do, and intense exercise is going to create that stress. Like when the bodies are, so what happens when we exercise, we're like breaking down muscle tissue, right? That the body has to rebuild. Well, if your body's already in a depleted state, like
It's got a lot to do, right?
It can't rebuild, right? And so you're just like digging your own grave, essentially.
Right.
So you're digging a deeper hole.
And I want to paint this picture like really well, because the body's under this massive amount of stress in which it's trying to deal with that stress,
Right.
and kind of recover and rebuild. And then we're adding this heavy load.
Right.
And so it's really understanding how much of that load we can add in, because it is providing a positive benefit to a point. But again, if it's too much,
Right.
now we're filling our stress bucket
Right.
so full, and the body's like, look, I got so much I'm trying to do, and you're giving me more work to do, right? Which is to
exactly.
kind of repair and recover from this. And so there's the positive signals that come from this exercise, this movement. But if we're giving it so much to do, then it's going to have to partition the load. And then, okay, well, you just gave me this massive stress. I got to deal with that. And then this other stuff over here, I'm just going to have to put on hold. So it's like this triage.
Delegate the resources.
Exactly.
What are we doing here? And so I committed to just 30 days of walking and yoga. So still moving my body, but in a low intensity restorative way. And that's when I really started making some bigger leaps and bounds in my healing process. And this goes back to like why I like to run a series of labs when I work with somebody. So one of the labs that I like to do is the Dutch cortisol hormone testing. So when we see that metabolized cortisol and what's going on with the cortisol rhythm, we can see that people are in a catabolic state, not an anabolic state.
Meaning
so
they're breaking down more than they're rebuilding.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we're in a catabolic state, they can't heal those food sensitivities. So this connects it back where we can see all these pieces of the puzzle. And that's where I can use that data to guide them and say, let's make some informed choices now, understanding the state that your body is in. Let's reduce that exercise intensity for a temporary period of time, which is going to help your body heal like the food sensitivity piece. It's going to help you heal your digestion. Like it's going to reduce the burden on the immune system and the hormone system and everything that's happening.
The liver, right? Big metabolic organ.
Yeah. So we'll like reduce exercise intensity. We work on like figuring out what foods are right for their body so they can function to their potential, get the right nutrients, reduce inflammation in that point in time. And then we work on sleep. And once we work on those two pieces of the puzzle and they start feeling better, their energy is up, they're losing weight, they're sleeping better, like all that stuff is happening, then we circle back and go, okay, now let's reconfigure your exercise routine so that you're creating variety, but also just having an understanding of today's not just leg day because it's leg day, right? So we're not going to be rigid around our routine. We're going to be checking in with our body. We're going to have more awareness about what is the burden of stress that my body has encountered for the last 24 to 48 hours. How am I going to choose my exercise routine wisely in this moment for what it is that I need right now so that I am getting the benefits out of it without the depletion, basically. And not just sticking to, these like, solutions in a box approaches, which we have that a lot in diet, right? We have all these dietary approaches and then we have all these workout routine approaches, and we kind of get like so reductionist and rigid in what it is, and try to shove people into a box when really everything should be personalized, and actually like decisions are made in the moment for what's right for right now.
And there's this interconnected piece, right? Where, if somebody is not moving and not exercising at all, if we increase their exercise load to a reasonable place, that can actually help sleep, right? So and I can explain the mechanisms, but it's not worthwhile. Exercise will improve sleep in a majority of people that aren't moving enough.
Yep.
And then consequently, better sleep will allow for more exercise, right? So these are all very interrelated. And if somebody's really struggling with sleep, it's a good chance that we're not going to be able to tolerate, or the exercise load must be modulated because of that sleep. And so we focus on sleep first. Once the sleep starts to come around, now we can start to introduce
fully
a little bit more
rested
exercise,
and restored, right?
So we got to figure out like where's this really leaky place in our sort of health habits. Really focus there, because if we improve that, we're going to improve so many of these other areas, right? And they're so interconnected.
Yeah, and I think just from a female perspective as well too, is that when we're working with women around exercise, we also want to take into consideration the fluctuation of the hormone cycle, and how do you even like align like your exercise routine based on that hormone cycle that's happening, so that you're working with the body versus working in opposition of the body. And I don't hear enough people actually talking about this. And that like the first, for women that are cycling, that first, 14 days or 2 weeks, first half of the cycle, based on what's happening with the hormones, what's happening with cortisol patterns, that's actually the more ideal time to do your heavy lifting.
Well, that's your as you go into your anabolic catabolic. That's your anabolic part of the cycle, right?
Anabolic
And that's
part
what
of
we
the
want to work
cycle.
with.
It's going to prevent injury as well too, ligament laxity and all that stuff that happens throughout the cycle. And then the second half of the cycle is when we can shift into more like high intensity interval training. But nobody's really talking about this, right? Not enough, essentially. And so that thing alone, when I look back at like my training routines for fitness shows, I'm like, I was working in opposition of my hormone cycles, which then leads to that, like contributes to that hormone dysfunction. That hormone dysfunction downstream leads to like food sensitivities and detox issues. So the female population, we actually need to get even a little bit more specific around what it is that we're doing with exercise. And that's also going to help fix sleep,
right?
Too.
Right. I mean, this is, in Ayurveda was kind of, I think, the first map that really anchored this in for me in a really profound way, which is this idea of timing, right? We have cycles and the time at which you do things, not only during the day, but of course in a woman's cycle, and even men have hormonal cycles, right? But not as profound. So really working with the cycle, and then the cycle of one's life, right? So, we're in an anabolic window up until, generally mid-20s, right? And then we kind of go to this very metabolically flexible kind of this middle ground in middle life. And then we go into this more catabolic state toward the end of our life. And so they're just natural things that we want to work with and understand about those. And when we do that, there's a reward, right? And when we don't understand these things, the timing at which we're doing things and how the natural cycles are working, we start to get out of balance, right? And there's a really good Ayurvedic talk that we have as part of this summit. And so we'll get into that a little bit deeper there. But it's just really important to understand that these exist and to learn to work with them to some degree.
Yeah. And I'm so glad we're just having this as part of the conversation, because I find that, most of the clientele that I work with, again, they're very active. They're running marathons, they're doing 5Ks, they're CrossFitters. And we've been so conditioned to think that like more exercise, that is, and it's hard for them to comprehend, to conceptualize, like, what do you mean I need to do less at the gym? And there's such an attachment to it in order to get their results. And it was a hard thing for me to overcome as well too. Like that idea that I wasn't going to have my ideal body if I let go of some of that exercise intensity. But when I actually did, I actually got exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Jen, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. Where can people find more of your work and what you're doing?
Yeah. So I'm known as the Holistic Health Boss, with a W, like the whole body, whole person, whole foods approach. I love to hang out on Instagram. So I love connecting with people over there. People can find me at Holistic Health Boss on Instagram. And that's also on my website as well too.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this concludes today's interviews, and I truly hope you enjoyed the fantastic information shared by our speakers. Be sure to tune in tomorrow because we have 3 more brilliant experts sharing scientifically proven strategies to help you accelerate healing, boost your energy, balance your hormones, and improve your gut. If you feel you might miss any of the upcoming interviews, I highly recommend you grab your all-access pass today at the exclusive event-only price of $67, so you can watch and rewatch at your leisure. All you have to do is click the button on this page to secure instant on-demand access to all 15 presentations, plus over $1,200 in bonuses. On behalf of the entire production crew, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the Food Sensitivity Summit.